I write this account by the flicker of a single candle, far beneath the streets of Riften. My hands still tremble. Brynjolf would certainly tease me if he were here. But you, my friend, you deserve to know why I've returned from Markarth empty-handed and haunted. It started as a simple job. Just slip into the Dwemer ruins beneath Markarth and steal an item of unknown power. For a thief of Riften, like me, Nisa Blackthorn, it was supposed to be just another heist. Turned out to be anything but that. Markarth's grey stone city loomed, carved into the mountainside with its crumbling Dwemer towers and terraces. Waterfalls glittered in the twilight as they cascaded through the heart of the city, but even their beauty felt cold and unwelcoming. Despite the picturesque facade, a palpable unease clanged to the air. The place has a grim reputation, that's for sure. Blood has been spilled on these stones for generations, and I'd heard the tales, how the Dwemer who built Markarth seemed to vanish in an instant, and how the Reach folk, the Forsworn, once seized the city and were slaughtered. How even in recent years, murders and conspiracy skulked the streets. Some said the city itself was cursed, its foundations soaked in too much blood. I paid those whispers little mind at the time. All I saw was a chance for another big score, enough gold to keep the guild comfortable for months, and my belly full of meat, of course. The client put a pouch of rubies in my hand as advance payment. A cursed relic? Superstition? I scoffed. In our line of work, every valuable trinket is cursed according to somebody. Gaining access to the ruins was easier than expected. Understone Keep held the main entrance to Neuschwanzell, but it was guarded and all too public. Instead, I was lucky enough, with the help of some beggars, to find an old smuggler's route outside the city. A rusted metal door, hidden by moss and rubble. With a bit of oil and elbow grease, I managed to coax it open, and the stale breath of the ancient earth exhaled into my lungs. I descended the crumbling stone steps into that darkness, my lantern cast long, dancing shadows on carved Dwemer faces along the walls. Each step like stepping into another time. The air was cold and dry, carrying the faint scent of metal and decay. I remember pausing by a massive gear half buried in rubble, just listening to the silence. And that was strange. Ruins, they're usually alive with skeevers jittering or water dripping. But here there was nothing. Only the sound of my own breathing. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for something. Navigating those first passages tested every trick that I knew. I kept one hand on the stone wall, and the other on my dagger's hilt, moving quietly through the maze of corridors. I recognized a few Dwemer warning runes on the walls. Twice I spotted pressure plates, just in time, thin seams across the floor that would have just unleashed flame jets or spinning blades. I carefully stepped over each of them. One wrong move could seal my fate, and I'd be down here forever. At one junction, I discovered a tattered camp, burned-out lanterns and a torn bedroll laid in disarray, and a skeleton still clad in rusted mail. The poor soul's chest plate was caved in, as if struck by something powerful. One bony hand was outstretched, pointing toward a narrow passage ahead. A warning, or a last desperate crawl. I wasn't sure, but either way, It sent a chill crawling up my spine. I whispered a quick prayer to Nocturnal to guide me through the dark, and carried on. Further in, the architecture began to change. The holes narrowed and sloped downward. The engravings on the walls grew more elaborate. I passed under a grand archway into a vault antechamber with tall ceilings and ornate pillars. At the far end stood a massive bronze door engraved with interlocking gears and strange constellations. I had no obvious handle or key, just a large central disc with Dwemer etchings to look at. To my surprise, it was actually slightly ajar, as if someone had passed through recently, and this set me on guard. The hairs on my neck began to stand up. Drawing a shallow breath, I slipped through the gap. My lantern fell upon the circular chamber beyond, and I immediately tasted metal and oil on the air. Rows of dormant Dwemer automata lined the walls, spiders and spheres, their eyes eerily dark. I'd seen deactivated machines before, and had learned to leave them alone. But here I had no choice. The crown was supposed to lie past these sentinels. I placed each foot with care, avoiding any obvious triggers. My heartbeat sounded thunderous in my ears as I crept forward. In the center of the chamber, raised on a pedestal, I spotted it. There it was, the Dwemer crown. Even in the dim light, I could tell it was extraordinary, forged of some silvery metal rather than any typical brass. It was studded with onyx gems and a single deep blue stone that glimmered faintly. The fabled crown of unknown power, just sitting there for the taking. It's too easy. It must be a trap. I circled the pedestal, scanning for wires, runes, any sign of a mechanism. The floor around it had a subtle mosaic, figures with halos of gears bowing to a central king who wore a familial crown. It felt like a warning. I realized too late that my presence alone had probably already triggered something. A sharp click sounded under my boot. I froze as a pressure plate sank. The walls groaned, gears turning. One by one, the eyes of the Dwemer automatons flickered to life, casting the chamber in an eerie orange light. I had seconds to react. A metal spider sprang forward from its alcove with unnerving speed. I ducked its leap and rolled behind a column as it skittered past. The room erupted into complete chaos. A dwarven sphere unfurled itself with a whir of blades, and at the far end, a massive centurion rumbled awake, steam hissing from its vents. I hadn't planned on fighting an army. I couldn't. I bolted for the far door as the sphere's dart whistled past my ear. The spider dropped from the ceiling to block my path. I slashed it with my dagger. The blade sparked off its bronze carapace to little effect. Its scythe-like leg swung at my head. I parried, my arm jolting with pain from the impact. Desperate, I kicked the automaton, knocking it back just enough to slip through a narrow gap in the door ahead. Throwing my shoulder against the heavy door, I heaved it shut. Metal scrapes and furious clanks sounded from the other side as the constructs slammed against it. But with one final push, the door latched. The din became a muffled clamor. I backed away, panting, my hands shaking around the hilt of my dagger, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. For a moment, I was safe. I found myself there in a maintenance tunnel, utterly dark save for the weak glow of my lantern. Pipes ran along one wall, and cobwebs hung in thick drapes from the ceiling, brushing past my hair. The air was stagnant and choking with dust, sticking to the back of my throat. The pounding of my heart began to settle, and only then did I notice a new sound. It wasn't the fading noise of the machines behind me. It was coming from ahead, from the dark. A faint whispering, just at the edge of hearing. Alone, in that claustrophobic tunnel, I strained to listen. A whisper too soft to make out, one that raised the hairs on my neck. Perhaps it was a trick of the acoustics, ancient pipes carrying distant voices from the city above. But as I took a few cautious steps, the sound followed, circling around me. This was no echo from Markarth's streets. My gut clenched with a simple truth that I was not alone. I crept forward, one hand brushing the wall for balance. The darkness beyond my lantern's glow felt almost solid. I heard my name in the murmurs. Nisa. A chill rippled through me. Other words swirled with it. Turn back. Leave. It could have been my mind playing tricks. The thundering of my heart forming phantom syllables. But every instinct I had screamed that something unseen was whispering directly into my ear. The tunnel opened suddenly to a wider hall, and the whispers hushed as if watching to see what I'd do. I lifted my lantern high. Faded murals adorned the walls depicting scenes of Dwemer craft and glory. One mural showed a dwarf craftsman presenting a glowing crown to a human king, a sight that made my skin crawl. In the center of the gallery-like space, I nearly stumbled over a corpse. He was slumped against a fallen stone block, and judging by his robes, he'd been a priest. The body was shriveled, skin taut over bone as if drained. An amulet of Arche hung around his neck, gleaming in the lantern light. My heart lurched. Arche is the god of the cycle of life and death, and his priests don't die in places like this for nothing. What had he found? With a shaking hand, I retrieved a scrap of parchment clasped in the corpse's hand. Most of it was smeared with dried blood, but there were a few words that I could make out. Crown. Evil. Must destroy. So it was true. The crown was cursed, or at least this poor soul believed so strongly enough to give his life. Arche's followers don't hunt idle legends. I wiped the sweat off my brow, feeling a conflict of emotions. I was standing in a deadly, trap-filled vault with ghosts whispering in the dark. All for the prize. There could be pure evil. Maybe I should have turned around, but behind me was a room full of murderous machines, and in front of me lay possibly the only way out, through the curse itself. A thief's greed and stubbornness die hard, but cursed or not, I intended to see this through. I gently closed the priest's eyes, an old gesture of respect, and muttered, "May Arche guide you to peace." And that is when the eyes of the priests snapped wide open. I jerked back with a yelp, nearly dropping my lantern. The priest's lifeless eyes bored into me, and his mouth gaped. From his throat issued a chorus of overlapping whispers, the same voices that had trailed me. They poured out, echoing, "Leave this place. The crown is ours. Death awaits." My blood turned to ice. I'd seen the dead rise before, skeletons animated by foul magic, but this was different. This man was clearly dead, but something was using him to speak. "Arche, protect me," I whispered, invoking the very deity he served. And the corpse fell silent, head thudding back against the stone. The whispering voices receded, slithering away into the darkness once more. Heart hammering, I stepped back and quickly pressed on, away from the tragic figure. Whatever was in these vaults was aware of me now. It wanted me gone. Perhaps it just wanted me afraid. Either would serve its purpose. Beyond the gallery, the halls took a more utilitarian design. Plain stone and metal, with occasional Dwemer pipes running along the ceiling. Many passengers were collapsed, forcing me down a winding route through debris and past rusted metal doors. My nerves were raw. I flinched at each drip of water or clink of gravel beneath my boots. As I rounded a corner, I spotted a soft orange glow ahead. Hope sparked in my chest. It might be an exit, or at least somewhere safe. I doused my lantern and crept forward. The glow came from a hooded lantern set out on the floor of a small chamber, and next to it, examining an ancient door engraved with runes, was a man. He was alive, solid and breathing. That fact alone made me sigh in relief. He wore a dirt-stained grey cloak over robes marked with Arke's symbol. I immediately thought of the dead priest behind me. This must be another of his kind, but alive this time. He hadn't noticed me yet, muttering to himself as he traced the symbol on a door. I stepped into the lantern light, keeping my dagger visible at my side but not raised. "You're no Dwemer construct or ghost," I said, my voice echoing softly. The man spun, startled. He snatched up a steel mace, leaning against the wall, and held it in front of him. In the warm light, I saw a middle-aged face, lined with worry and grime, eyes sharp and wide with surprise. "Who's there?" he demanded, his gaze locked onto me, flickering over my leather armor and the Thieves' Guild emblem on my shoulder. A thief? "By the 9, how easy," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Nisa. I'm just trying to survive this place the same as you." He didn't lower the mace. "No thief comes down here by chance. You're after the crown, aren't you?" I gave a silent shrug. "Let's say my reasons for being here are complicated. But right now it seems that our goals align. Staying alive and getting out. Perhaps we can help each other." He hesitated, looking me up and down. Up close I could see the small amulet of Arke around his neck and a fresh cut on his cheek. He looked exhausted, and so was I. Finally, he spoke. "I am Father Andric of the Temple of Arke." He glanced toward the door that he'd been inspecting. "This vault, it's evil. The crown you seek must be destroyed. I can't let it leave here." I swallowed and decided to level with him. "On my way here, I found another priest of Arke in the tunnels. I'm sorry he didn't make it." Andric's face fell. He lowered the mace a fraction. "Brother Alvus," he said quietly. "I feared as much." He closed his eyes in a brief pained silence. "Arke rest his soul. I swear that his death will not be in vain. That evil relic will be purged." "Believe me," I said, "after what I've seen, I'm not keen on wearing the thing. If destroying it ends this nightmare, then I'm all for it." The priest seemed mildly surprised at that. The mace lowered another inch. "Really?" "Really," I nodded. "I just want to get out in one piece. I can deal with traps and locks. But you seem to know about the curse we're facing. Deal?" Father Andric took a deep breath and then gave a single nod. "Deal. Arke teaches us to aid those in need. Even thieves, I suppose. A ghost of a wry smile touched his lips. I allowed myself a tiny grin in return. Never thought I'd be teaming up with a priest in a haunted Dwemer vault, but, well, there we were. We turned together to face the ruined door. As we approached the door, Father Andric shared what he knew in a low voice, words echoing in the dark. Arcane scriptures spoke of an artifact like this. Long ago, a Dwemer master gifted a crown to a Reachman warlord, promising it would unite his people. Instead, it drove him mad with suspicion. He butchered his own thanes, and his tribe fell into ruin. In the end, survivors sealed that cursed crown in these tunnels, hoping to bury its wicked influence. It seems the Dwemer built this vault to contain it, until, of course, fools like us came in. Strange as it sounds, I was glad to not be alone. The priest and the thief, an unlikely duo in the dark. Whatever awaited us, at least we could face it together, not as solitary prey. We might even have a chance. Andric pointed to an engraving of an eye eclipsed by a gear on the door. This symbol, I saw it in my visions. The relic lies beyond here. The door had no handle or obvious lock, only a series of rotating discs with Dwemer symbols. A puzzle lock, and a tough one at that. I cracked my knuckles. Stand aside, Father. Picking locks is my department. Kneeling on the door, I got to work. It took several minutes of careful tinkering, my ears attuned to each tiny tick of the mechanism. I rotated the etched discs one by one, trying to align the Dwemer runes into a coherent pattern. Perhaps a name or a constellation. Twice I thought I had it, only to hear a grinding jam, forcing me to start over. Sweat beaded on my brow as I nudged the final disc. But at last, a satisfying heavy clunk echoed from within the door. The ancient gears began to turn, and the great slab slid aside. When it opened, it revealed a long hallway beyond. We stepped in, side by side, the priest and the thief. Whatever awaited us, at least we could go together, and thus we walked forward, weapons ready. A rush of stale, foul air made us wince. We advanced, finding cells lining the hall, ancient prison cells with rusted bars. Inside, some skeletal remains hung in shackles. The sight of those bones sent a shiver through me. Even the Dwemer had their dungeons, it seems. Andric quietly murmured a blessing for the departed as we passed cell after cell. Halfway down, I started hearing things again. A scrape that wasn't for us. A third set of footfalls. I glanced over my shoulders, but nothing but empty corridor and dancing shadow. My nerves jangled. This hallway felt watched. Once or twice I got a flicker of movement in a cell, like a skull tilting upward in the darkness, or a bony hand twitching. When I shone the lantern that way, the remains were inert. I quickened my pace, and so did Andric. Nothing needed to be said. At a fork in the hall, Andric suddenly tensed. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I held my breath. There, it was faint, but it sounded like a child weeping, echoing from that left-hand path. I felt my stomach lurch. It sounded so real. But it couldn't be. Surely not. Andric clenched his jaw. Illusions and echoes, thief. The crown preys upon us. Do not trust anything, he warned, voice unsteady. I put a hand on his shoulder and nodded toward the right-hand corridor. We stick to the plan. Ignore it. He looked torn, but followed my lead away from the phantom cries. As we departed, the sobbing rose into a heartbreaking wail that made my blood run cold. and then suddenly faded into silence. I bit down to urge to cover my ears. If it was trying to unsettle us, it was working. The corridor ended in another door, this one made of stone and carved with the image of that crowned king again. My fingers trembled slightly as I pushed it, but it swung open smoothly. We entered a vast circular chamber. This had to be the heart of the vault. The ceiling domed high above, lost in shadows. In the center of the room was a raised dais, and atop it a pedestal sat with the Dwemer crown, glowing with its faint blue light. Despite everything, my breath caught. We had found it. Father Andric's gasp was one of reverence and fear. "Arche, preserve us," he whispered. The crown was beautiful and terrible all at once, much more opposing here in the dark, throbbing with an uncanny life. I stepped forward with caution. "So, priest, how do we even destroy this thing?" My voice sounded so small in that great hall, but before Andric could answer, a cold presence filled the chamber. Around the dais, shimmering figures appeared, one after another, ghosts taking form. I counted a dozen at least. They were of all kinds, a Dwemer artisan with hollow eyes, a Reach woman with wild hair and a bloody wound in her gut, a richly dressed Nord noble with his throat slashed, even a little girl clutching a rag doll. All dead, all bound here for eternity. A deathly chill accompanied their arrival, and the hair on my arms stood on end, panicked. Their faces were twisted with anguish and rage, hollow eyes fixed on us intruders. Andric held up his amulet. "Peace, spirits," he called out, mustering a calm tone. "We are here to release you." In that moment I truly hoped he was right, that destroying the crown would free these tormented souls. The ghosts did not seem inclined to talk. They rushed at us in a flood of pale light. Andric shouted a prayer, and a burst of golden light flared from his amulet. But it only slowed them. I felt a ghost pass through me, and an icy shock knifed through my heart. I screamed as foreign memories of terror and pain exploded in my mind, visions of a life cut short, of betrayal and blood. But they were gone in an instant, and I was on my hands and knees, gasping. Andric had fared little better. He was hunched over, panting, as the last wisp of spirit flicked back toward the crown. "They are bound to it. Hurry. Do it now while they're dormant." For an instant, cold fear clutched me. I imagined my own soul trapped among those ghosts, doomed to haunt this darkness forever. But I refused to let that be my fate. We had to end this now. My legs shook as I stood. The crown sat gleaming atop the dais, deceptively innocent despite the horrors tied to it. Its pulsing gem caught my eye, and for a moment I found myself transfixed. A whisper coiled through my mind, seductive and insistent. "Take it. Claim its power." It was as if a dozen tempting voices spoke at once. "He will never let you have it. He will betray you. Strike first." My heart pounded suddenly with anger and suspicion, not entirely my own. I shot a glance at Andric and saw him eyeing me wearily. Was that distrust I saw, or just my own fear reflected? I realized I had raised my dagger slightly without thinking. At the same time, Andric had tightened his grip on the mace, uncertainty in his eyes. The cursed crown was twisting our thoughts, urging us to turn on each other. I tore my gaze from the artifact and sucked in a breath, fighting off the haze of paranoia. "No, I won't," I whispered to myself. willing the foreign malice out of my head. Across from me, Andric blinked rapidly, as if shaking off a daze of his own. He lowered his mace, and I lowered my dagger. We exchanged a grave nod, each acknowledging how close we had come to folly. "Its influence is strong, thief," Andric muttered, "but we know its tricks now." I swallowed, my mouth dry, and turned back toward the crown. We would give it no more chances to divide us. Andric uncorked the vial of holy water with trembling hands. He began sprinkling the water over the crown, chanting a litany to Arche. The liquid hissed on the metal, each drop eliciting a sizzle and flicker of that blue gem. I gripped my dagger, ready to smash the thing as soon as it was weakened. All at once, a thunderous boom resounded. An unseen force blasted us backward like rag dolls. I hit the ground hard, skidding to the edge of the room and losing my lantern. Darkness swallowed us save for the eerie glow of the crown. A voice filled the chamber, deep and echoing with fury. "Interlopers, your souls will feed the vault." The malevolence in those words shook me to my core. The heavy stone door behind us slammed shut of its own accord. The floor shuddered, nearly knocking me off my feet as I struggled. I heard metal grinding. From the walls emerged two gigantic dwarven centurions, the final guardians, awakened by the crown's anger. Their eyes burned like forge fire as they lumbered toward us, each footstep a drumbeat of doom. Andric pulled himself up beside me, mace in hand. We shared a desperate look. There was no running now, only fighting. Our only choice was to finish what we started. I shouted out to him, "Keep them busy. We have to destroy the crown." He nodded, stepping forward to draw the attention of the nearest centurion. The colossal automaton swung its arm and Andric barely rolled aside, the hammer smashing into the floor with a crash. I took the chance to sprint towards the dais where the crown was still rested, undisturbed amid all the chaos. The second centurion intercepted me, a massive blade on its arm slicing down. I threw myself into a dive, the blade whooshing overhead and sparking off the stone. Scrambling up, I saw Andric across the chamber. He held out his amulet and shouted a prayer. A flare of light burst forth, causing the centurion near him to stutter and slow, gears screeching, as if some invisible weight pressed upon it. But it wouldn't hold for long. It bought a few moments at least. I dashed up the dais. A ghostly nobleman lunged at me, mouth stretched in a silent scream. I grit my teeth and bowed through the phantom, the cold washing over me, but not stopping me. At the pedestal now, I seized the crown with my free hand. It was freezing, like ice to the touch. I almost dropped it in shock. The blue gem pulsed violently, as if sensing its peril. My vision swam as a cacophony of whispering voices invaded my mind. I could hardly think. I slid down off the dais, crown in hand, and nearly stumbled as a wave of dizziness hit me. "Andric!" I cried out, though I couldn't see him just then. "I have it!" His voice answered from somewhere to my left, hoarse and urgent. "On the ground! Quickly!" I understood. He needed it stationary to strike. I threw the crown on the ground, the stone floor, its metal ringing out sharply. And summoning all his strength, Andric hurled his mace. The steel weapon sailed through the air and smashed into the side of the crown with a burst of divine light, knocking the artifact across the floor toward me. The blow dented the circlet and cracked the large gem, but it wasn't done. The centurions were recovering, engines whirring angrily. One stormed toward Andric and the other toward me. We knew we had seconds at best. I raised my dagger and brought it down with all my might onto the cracked gemstone as the crown lay before me. And the dagger's point struck true. With a shattering crack, the blue gem exploded into shards. A horrific wail erupted. Dozens of voices howling in grim unison. The chamber was flooded with blinding blue light as if 100 souls had cried out all at once for freedom. For an instant, I glimpsed ghostly figures swirling upward, drawn towards some distant peace as the curse was broken. A shockwave of force burst from the crown, throwing me backward. I hit the floor and slid until my back slammed against a wall. Pain. It jolted through me, and a high-pitched whine filled my ears, and then... nothing. Silence. I blinked, groggy and aching. The centurion looming over me had stopped cold. Its sword hung in mid-swing, mere inches from where I'd fallen. As I watched, the massive automaton toppled over with a crash. Across the way, the other centurion had collapsed as well. Of the ghosts, there was no sign, but a fading wisp of light that curled up toward the ceiling and vanished. It was over. The cursed crown of Markarth was destroyed, and with it, its guardians. For a moment I just lay there on the cold stone, disbelieving that I was still alive. Eventually a scraping sound drew my attention. Father Andric, dragging himself from under the remains of a centurion's arm. I forced myself upright with a groan and hurried unsteadily to him. He was battered and bloody, but he was breathing. I helped him to his feet, and we stood in the center of that ruined vault, leaning on each other, surrounded by the wreckage of Dwemer machines and the silence of freed spirits. In the gloom, our eyes met, and we shared a weary, triumphant smile. On the dais, the crown's metal was shattered, the gemstones ground to glittering dust. Seeing it in pieces sent a flood of relief through me. The oppressive weight that had been stalking my mind since I entered Markarth seemed to lift. I had noted just how much the crown's influence had burrowed into my thoughts, like a venom slowly numbing its victims until it was gone. I managed to joke. "Let's not do that again, Andric." He responded with a weak laugh. "Agreed. No relic is worth that kind of horror." But we needed to get out of here before anything else decided to awaken. Supporting each other, we made our way back through the corridors. Oddly, the vault was quiet now, peacefully so. The sense of lurking dread had ebbed. In a stroke of luck, one of the tunnels had been caved in, and it was now partially cleared, likely shaken loose by the blast. Squeezing through a gap, we found a narrow stairway curling upward. Finally, a way out. We climbed up painfully, each step a fresh trial to our bruised bodies. At the top was a rusted iron hatch. Together we heaved it open. Cold dawn air rushed in, and I drank it in like water in a desert. And there we were, emerging on a rocky hillside on the outskirts of Markarth, under a sky streaked in the early morning light. Never had I been so happy to see the stars fade into dawn. We sat on a boulder for a short while, not caring about the dust and blood covering us, just grateful to be alive. The first rays of sun were peeking over the mountains, casting long shadows over the reach. Andric murmured a prayer of thanks to Arche under his breath, breaking the silence. And for my part, I sent a quiet word of gratitude to Nocturnal. If ever the Night Mistress lent her luck, it was certainly then. I wasn't picky which divine or Daedra heard my thanks. I was just glad that we made it out. After a time, Andric turned to me. "You have my gratitude, Nisa. You saved my life, and many others in the end." "Likewise, Andric," I said, managing a faint grin. "I couldn't have survived without you either." Strange but true. We two unlikely allies had made it. We carefully made our way toward the road. Andric said he had a safe place to recuperate nearby, and would inform the temple that the relic's curse was ended. I wanted nothing more than to get far, far away from Markarth and take a week off. Before we parted, Andric offered a final blessing, tracing Arcae's circle symbol in the air and wishing me safe travels. I just nodded. I was more thankful than I could express. He headed off toward a farmhouse in the distance where friends awaited, and I trudged eastward along the road, giving Markarth one last weary glance over my shoulder. The journey back to Riften was long. Each night I jolted awake from nightmares of stone corridors and clanking metal. More than once I could have sworn I heard my name whispered just beyond the firelight, as if something unseen had followed me out. I sprung up, blade in hand, but only silence and darkness met me. Perhaps it was just the wind, or even some fragment of the vault's evil still clung to me. Either way, I kept my campfires high and my dagger close. The memories of those voices were too fresh. When I finally slipped back into the Ragged Flagon, the familiar shadows of the cistern felt comforting, but I couldn't completely banish that echo from my mind. I reported to my guild an unsuccessful venture, leaving out the more harrowing details. Some secrets, I decided, were best kept among those who experienced them. And so, I'm confiding the whole truth of it, only in you, my friend. I trust your discretion, and I know you'll understand why some nightmares are better left unspoken to others. Even now, telling this to you, I can feel that place in my bones, the way darkness there seemed alive. The moment the Crown's voices scratched at the edge of my sanity, it stays with you. I didn't bring back gold or jewels, but I carry scars inside that may never fully healed. I share this, so you understand why I turn down certain jobs now. Why the mere mention of Dwemer ruins or easy treasure makes me twitch. I survived the cursed vault of Markarth, but part of me is still down there in the dark, listening for a whisper I pray to never hear again. So take this as a warning, from one thief to another. Not all that glitters is worth the risk. I survived by skill, luck, and the grace of whatever gods watch over these fools. But many who sought the crown never returned at all. Their bones now litter those tunnels. Some shadows hide nightmares that no amount of coin can justify. You have to stay smart and safe, and if you ever find yourself in those depths with a whisper of doubt in your mind, just remember my tales. Trust in your allies, trust your gut, and for the love of Nocturnal, don't let greed drown out caution. Stay safe in the shadows, my friend. Nisa Blackthorn. The chill of the catacombs clung to my skin like a wet shroud as I crept through the darkness beneath the city of solitude. Every step I took was measured, my soft boots feeling for the uneven stones or hidden pressure plates in that ancient floor. The stale air. It tasted of dust and decay. A reminder that these tunnels doubled as tombs for Solitude's dead. Faint shafts of moonlight speared through the cracks in the ceiling where roots had broken through, offering just enough illumination to keep me from fumbling blindly. And my heart, it thundered in my chest, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly. The greatest asset of a thief is patience. I reminded myself and repeated that mantra that I had long learned in Riften's underworld. It had taken me weeks of careful listening at the Ragged Flagon to catch wind of this rumor. A priceless chalice, hidden in a vault far below Solitude, a treasure supposedly lost since the War of Red Diamond. The whispers claimed it was worth a king's ransom. And for someone like me, a Dunmer far from home and hungry to prove my worth to the Thieves Guild, it was a temptation far too great to ignore. Yet as I made my descent into the catacombs, I felt the weight of unease coiling in my gut. Rumors in the guild were often shadows hiding daggers. Could I really trust this tale? Only fools chase legends without caution, and you didn't need experience in the guild to know that. But look at me. I was already here, determined to prove that a Dunmer from Windhelm's grey quarter could snatch this prize from beneath Solitude's nose and make somewhat of a name for himself. And so I slid along a curved wall carved with faded Nordic runes. My fingertips brushed one of the engravings, a worn depiction of some long-dead hero. Perhaps the resting place of the infamous Wolf Queen Potemma. Who knows? But the thought made my nerves prickle. I silently begged Nocturnal for luck, for I traversed a sanctum of bones where even Arkay's blessings might falter. In the distance, somewhere deeper in the maze of vaults and halls, I heard the faint drip of water echoing like the ticks of a clock. And I wasn't sure how much time I had before dawn, but each minute down here felt like an eternity. Up ahead, the passage forked. To the left, a narrow stairway led further down into the gloom, toward the older burial vaults. To the right lay a corridor that seemed to slope upward again. I paused, one hand resting against the cold stone. My instincts tugged me left, towards the depths where any treasure would likely be hidden. But as I leaned forward to peer down the left stairwell, a sound froze me in place. It was the faint scrape of a boot on stone, the unmistakable scuff of someone trying and failing to remain silent. I pressed myself into the alcove at the fork, dousing the small hooded lantern I carried. Darkness enshrouded me. My eyes, adjusted to the dim, could just make out the outline of the corridor ahead. At first, I didn't see anything. Only blackness and the phantom shapes one imagines when staring too long into the shadow. But that sound came again, a gentle clink like metal upon metal, coming from the right-hand corridor. My breath caught. Had one of Solitude's guards ventured down here? That's unlikely. What kind of guard would be bored enough to come down to the catacomb at this hour? Maybe it was just a city sewer worker, or one of the priests of Arkay from the Hall of the Dead, performing some late rites. I didn't know. But whoever it was, they were not making much noise, but enough for a fellow sneak to notice. A flicker of amber light danced on the stone wall and then vanished. Someone had quickly shuttered a torch or lantern. If it was a guard, they wouldn't be trying to hide their light, and that meant that somebody else was down here, looking for something. Possibly the same thing I was. Slowly, I eased out of my alcove and headed down the narrow stairs, deeper into the catacomb. If another thief was here chasing the same prize, I had to move carefully, and perhaps use them to my advantage. Many a greedy burglar has sprinted into a trap, but it's better that they spring the jaws than I. The stairway descending into a low arched tunnel was lined with alcoves. Within each recess lay crumbling skeletons wrapped in molding burial linen. The smell of dust was thicker here, laced with the faint hint of rot that no amount of time could erase. I stepped gingerly, knees bent to lower my center of gravity, distributing my weight evenly in case the floor held any unwanted surprises. At one point, my boot nudged something. A broken arrow shaft lying on the stones. I knelt to inspect it. Its tip was nowhere to be seen, but a dark stain of fresh blood marred the wood. My jaw tightened. The blood was fresh, so fresh that it glistened in my lantern's faint light. Someone ahead of me had already triggered a trap, and they had bled for it, likely within the last few minutes, and judging by the lack of a corpse, they were still moving. Was it the same person I'd heard moments ago? Or yet another prowler in these depths? The possibility of multiple rivals slithered into my mind. Was this an open secret now? The tale of the chalice? If so, I cursed my luck, but speculation wouldn't keep me alive down here. I set the broken arrow aside and pressed on, eyes scanning the walls and floor for any sign of further traps, or for the one who had triggered the last. The tunnel opened into a broader vault, a circular crypt with a high ceiling lost in shadow. Stone biers stood like silent sentinels around the chamber's edge, each holding a coffin. I slid along the wall, keeping to the darkness, ears straining for any hint of the other trespasser. My fingers brushed the hilt of my dagger. If I found them, I couldn't be sure what they would do, and in the thieves' world, a stranger in the dark might greet you with steel before words. A faint shuffle sounded from behind one of the biers across the room. I narrowed my eyes, discerning a hunched silhouette beside a coffin, nearly blending with the gloom. Whoever it was, they were trying to stay hidden, perhaps nursing their wounds. The blood on the arrow had told me they might be hurt, and of course, that means that I have the advantage. Keeping my blade low and ready, I ghosted forward. My soft steps made barely a whisper against the stone. Closer. I could make out the curve of a leather pauldron on the figure's shoulder, the glint of a steel dagger in hand. They hadn't noticed me. Their posture was tense, but the head was turned toward the tunnel I'd come from, almost as if expecting something to come from that direction. They didn't see me approaching from their flank in the darkness, and in one heartbeat I closed the gap. I lunged, hooking my arm around the stranger's neck while pressing the point of my dagger against their back. "Don't move," I hissed under my breath, trying to sound menacing enough to freeze them. But they reacted with startling speed, faster than I'd anticipated from any injured foe. The dagger in their hand lashed backward violently. I jerked aside, narrowly avoiding a slash to my thigh. We broke apart, each of us scuttling backward a few paces. So much for a clean ambush. The figure, I could now see it was a man, or rather, a Khajiit by his silhouette, and the faint glint of light catching one of his feline eyes, snarled low. Moonlight from a crack above fell across us just enough that he could have noticed my Dunmer features as well, my scarred cheek and red eyes beneath my hood. "You're no guard," I whispered, my dagger still raised. His curved ears twitched in my direction as he held his blade at a defensive pose. We circled each other, warily before the coffins. "Why attack, Joseph? He demanded softly, his tail flicked in agitation behind him. Before I could answer, a new sound interrupted us, the creak of a leather boot on the stair we'd come from, followed by a faint glow bobbing in the archway. I saw Josiah's ears perk and his eyes dart toward the tunnel. The Khajiit swiftly snuffed out the small candle lantern he had set on the floor near his feet, plunging us into pure darkness once more. We exchanged a glance, without a word, moved into position on either side of the archway. Whoever was coming, we were not going to be caught off guard. Sure enough, footsteps approached, slow and careful. A silhouette emerged from the faint light. A figure holding a hooded lantern aloft, trying to pierce the gloom. In the dim glow I glimpsed a fur-lined cloak and the dull sheen of a drawn sword. A Solitude guard. Here, in the depths, now. The figure stepped fully into the light, sweeping the lantern in an arc. Its light grazed over my hiding spot. I held my breath, dagger at the ready. A few more steps. Just a little further. With a roar, barely above a whisper, Josiah pounced from the left, and I lunged from the right. We collided with the intruder, our combined weight driving her to the ground. Her sword clattered from her grasp and skidded across the stone. They gave a startled cry, definitely a woman's voice, before it was smothered by Josiah clamping a furred hand over the mouth. I wrested the lantern from her grip and shut its shutter, plunging us into darkness once more to avoid drawing any more eyes. She thrashed beneath us violently, one gauntleted elbow catching me hard in the ribs. I stifled a grunt, but even pinned she was fighting ferociously. "Get off! I'm not a guard, you fools," the woman spat, Josiah's hand still over her mouth. "Guild! I'm with the guild, you idiots!" A muffled outburst gave me pause. Wait, the guild? In the dark I could make out her face, but her voice carried the brash accent of a Riften local. A sick realization dawned on me. We had just ambushed another thief from her own fold. I tapped Josiah's arm. "Let her speak," I whispered. He reluctantly lifted his hand from her mouth, though we kept her arms pinned. "Get off me," the woman hissed, more clearly now, "unless you want the whole city to hear." There was a mixture of anger and pain in her tone. I shifted my weight from her and motioned for Josiah to do the same. We rose, and she scrambled to her feet, breathing hard. I heard her swipe up her fallen sword, and then a moment of tense silence as we stood there, three shadows caught in a snare of our own making. Cautiously, I opened the lantern's shutter a sliver. A thin beam of light revealed the woman's face at last, angular and smudged with dirt from our scuffle. A blonde braid, half loose around her fur-lined collar. Recognition flickered in my mind. Yes, I'd seen her. At least once or twice at the Ragged Flagon back in Riften. She was indeed a guild thief, and at that one with a reputation for bold action. Her eyes, a piercing green, glared at us both. "I remember you," I said carefully, keeping my dagger lowered. "You drink at the Flagon, don't you?" "Yeah, you're one of us." She gave a curt nod, sheathing her sword at her hip. "And I remember you," she replied in a clipped tone. "The Dunmer always sits in the corner, just watching." We never spoke, but yes, I'm in the guild. Her eyes flicked to Josiah and narrowed. Him, though. I've not seen a Khajiit in the cistern before. Josiah shrugged, his feline features impassive. "This one is newly arrived to Riften. I've not had the time for introductions. But it seems we share the same goal, yes?" "The chalice," I said. The obvious now hung between us like a guillotine blade. We're all here for the same treasure, aren't we? She gave a bitter laugh under her breath. So much for a secret score. I should have figured. She touched a hand to her shoulder, and I noticed for the first time a dark patch of blood seeping through her leather sleeve. The arrow trap's doing. No doubt about that. They told me I might not be the only one to seek it, but I assumed they meant guards or rivals, not our own damned guild. Rumor had it, the prize was ripe for the taking, I murmured back, sheathing my own dagger, now that we seemed to have an understanding of sorts. I wasn't told outright. I just overheard it in the cistern. I thought it to be a lucky chance. Josiah nodded. This one caught word of a big score being whispered in Skyrim's underworld. This one could not resist such a lure. But it seems I am not the only one. I nodded at Josiah's words, grudgingly accepting the truth of it. We started off on the wrong foot, I said. Perhaps we should introduce ourselves properly, if only so we know what to shout when the next trap nearly kills us all. As for me, I'm Draelus. I offered my name, figuring honesty might breed a bit of trust. Formerly of Windhelm, lately of Riften. Draelus, she repeated. I'm Sylvian, Riften born and raised. She pressed a hand to the bleeding gash on her arm with a wince, currently wishing that I'd worn thicker armor. Sylvain, I acknowledged with a nod, then glanced to our Khajiit companion. He flicked his ears in greeting. Josiah is called Josiah, he said wryly, and I couldn't help but smirk at the redundant introduction. No sense in more knives between us yet. Let us find this chalice and escape these holes alive. Sylvain took a moment to tear a strip from her cloak and bind her wounded arm tightly. The bleeding slowed. We exchanged glances, an unspoken agreement settling among us from here onward that we move as one. Whatever lay ahead, facing it together, gave us a sliver of hope. We're alone. We had nearly doomed each other. And so we ventured, deeper into the catacomb, moving in a staggered line to cover each other's backs. The passages grew older still, masonry giving way to natural caverns where dripping stalactites glimmered in our lamps. Now and then, we passed rusted braziers or sconces. Long, cold, and empty alcoves. It suggested we were heading toward a more significant chamber. I suspected a large vault lay just ahead, likely the resting place of the supposed chalice. The silence between us was broken only by our cautious footfall and the distant drip of water as we pressed on toward our goal. At last, we entered that great vault. A massive stone door loomed before us, its ancient lock large and foreboding. My heart skipped. Someone had beaten us here. We exchanged alarmed looks, and then I knelt to examine the lock. It was complex, a Dwemer-made mechanism, likely repurposed from some old ruin to guard this vault. But fortunately, intricate locks have always been somewhat of a specialty of mine, and so with a deep breath I withdrew a slender lockpick and a small tension wrench from my belt pouch. Josiah and Sylvain flanked me, weapons drawn in case our activities drew any unwanted company. Minutes passed in fraught silence as I felt for the lock secrets. My first pick snapped with a soft tick. I muttered a curse and forced myself to focus. Another pick, a gentle twist. There, the final tumber yielded with a satisfying crack. I carefully pushed the heavy door and swung inward on creaking hinges. We slipped inside the vault and pulled the door shut behind us. Sylvain held up the lantern, unveiling the chamber. It was a wide, circular room ringed with marble pillars. At its center stood a pedestal of polished black stone, and my heart began to pound with anticipation. Resting atop that pedestal, I expected to see the fabled chalice glittering with gems. But the pedestal was empty. For a long moment, none of us moved. The lantern's light flickered over the bare stone. There was no treasure, no gilded cup encrusted with rubies, only a scuffed spot in the dust where something might have sat long, long ago. A cold understanding washed over me like a grave chill. We'd risked it all for nothing. No, it has to be here, Sylvain whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. She limped forward, shoving the lantern into my hands to free her uninjured arm. Frantically, she ran her hands over the pedestal's surface, as if an invisible prize might appear out of thin air. Her fingers, instead, found a small parchment pinned to the stone by a dagger. I stepped closer as she snatched up the parchment. Josiah peered over her other shoulder, and in the trembling light, Sylvain read the words aloud, each one falling from her lips like a blow of a hammer. "If you are reading this, then you took the bait," she read, voice flat with shock. She swallowed hard and continued, "There is no priceless chalice. Only the fools gamble." Sylvain's voice trembled with rage now. "Your greed has been duly noted. Remember, the shadows favor the cunning, not the covetous." She nearly crushed the parchment in her fist as she spat out the final line. "Sincerely, the Thieves Guild Guildmaster." Sylvain's face had gone pale with fury. "Those bastards," she growled, crumpling the note and hurling it to the floor. "They used us as pawns. Nearly got us killed for some damn lesson. Some game." She kicked the base of the pedestal with a scream of frustration, the sound ringing off the old marble walls. But before we could calm her, a distant shout answered. A real one this time, from outside the vault. It was the unmistakable call of a guard, voices barking orders, the clatter of boots on stone. The Solitude guards had heard the ruckus, and they were on their way. Josiah hissed, "Guards," his ears flattening. Although we could already see the beam of a lantern outside through the cracks of the door, they would be at the threshold in moments. My mind raced. We were exhausted, and a fight against heavily armed soldiers in these close quarters. Well, we may as well just drop weapons now. I scanned the vault desperately for another way out. The Guildmaster had to have gotten in to leave that note. There must be a secret exit. "Help me look," I whispered urgently. Josiah's nostrils flared and he pointed towards the back of the vault. "There's moving air here." Together we hurried to the back wall, feeling for any crevice or loose stone. Sylvain's fingers, driven by adrenaline, finally found a gap. "Here," she exclaimed under her breath. She jammed the Guildmaster's discarded dagger into the seam and levered with all her strength. With a grind of ancient hinges, a section of the wall popped open. A hidden door, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Behind us, the vault's main door shuddered. The guards were trying to push in, but the heavy door, now re-locked from the inside, managed to hold for a moment. But it wouldn't hold for long. We slipped one by one into the secret passage, closing the panel behind us just as we heard the vault door begin to give way. Plunged into darkness, the narrow tunnel barely wide enough to squeeze through. I led the way now, one hand braced on the damp wall, the other gripping my dagger in case we ran into any surprises. But the air, it seemed to be fresher here, and it carried the briny tang of the sea. This passage was some kind of smuggler's escape route, a secret egress from Solitude's depths to the outside world. Behind us, faintly, I heard the muffled clamor of guards discovering the hidden door. A shout echoed down the tunnel. They were coming. "Run," I urged, though none of us needed the encouragement. We stumbled and sprinted through the winding passage as it sloped upwards, the promise of freedom drawing upon us. At last, a pale glimmer of the night appeared ahead. The tunnel opened into the side of a rocky hill on the outskirts of Solitude. A rusty iron grate barred the exit, but its lock was long broken. We shoved it open and burst out into the cool night air, skidding down a short embankment of grass and loose soil. But no time to celebrate. We weren't safe yet. From the tunnel behind, a helmeted head emerged, one of the city guards in hot pursuit, lantern in one hand, sword in the other. Against the moonlight, he spotted us. "Stop right there." An arrow whistled past as we dove behind a cluster of boulders. Sylvain, panting, drew her bow and sent an arrow into the guard's thigh. He howled and stumbled back into the tunnel. A few precious seconds we were glad to have. "Go, go," I urged. Without looking back, we fled into the night. We left that mouth of the tunnel behind and plunged into the cover of trees and rocks along the slope. The shouts of confused guards faded into the background, and the lights of Solitude's walls glimmered high above, unaware of the three shadows slipping away below. Only once we were a safe distance from the city did we finally collapse to catch our breath. Hidden in the shadow of a gnarled pine, my lungs burned and every muscle ached. But we were alive, and we were free. For a long moment, the three of us simply sat there on the dark hillside, staring up at the distant glow of Solitude's windows and the stars above. Sylvain was the first to break the silence. She let out a strained laugh, equal parts exhaustion, equal parts disbelief. By the divines, what a night. She glanced at me and Josiah, shaking her head. "You know, if you told me yesterday I'd trust two strangers to watch my back down in that dingy dungeon and save my hide from the Jarl's guards, I would have called you mad." Josiah chuffed in agreement. "This one feels the same. We were three fools chasing a lie. But perhaps," he flicked an ear thoughtfully, "perhaps not complete fools in the end." I turned the crumpled note over in my hands. The cruel lesson of the Guildmaster. In the faint moonlight, I could just make out the words, "Fools gamble." A bitter taste filled my mouth. But it wasn't just anger. It was a shame at my own eagerness, and oddly, a hint of pride in what we had overcome together. I folded the parchment neatly and tucked it away. "Maybe we were fools," I said, meeting their eyes. "But if this night proved anything, it's that we're also survivors. The guild tried to pit us against each other, but we made it out because we had each other's backs." Sylvain managed a tired smile, wiping dirt from her cheek. Perhaps we're partners in failure. Is that it? I managed to smile too, and I replied, well, partners, at least, if you'll have it. I extended a hand first to her, then to Josiah. We started this night as strangers, but I'd rather face whatever comes next with you two at my side rather than alone. Josiah's grin flashed in the darkness, his teeth a sharp pearlescent. Indeed, Josiah thinks we make a fine crew, if a cursed one. Sylvain clasped my hand briefly, her grip firm despite the night's ordeal. A fragile alliance, maybe, she said. But after what we've been through, I'll take it over nothing. And so we rose, 3 tired, dirty and bloody silhouettes against the fading stars. Behind us lay betrayal in Solitude's walls. Ahead lay the open road. We moved on, side by side, a trio of hardened thieves tempered by folly and survival. We'd lost the treasure that never was, but in its place we found camaraderie born of a shared danger. In the end, I suppose, that will have to be enough. I still see it, you know, when I close my eyes, the glint of cursed gold and shadows dancing at the edge of the firelight. People often ask me why I've given up on easy coin, why I refuse to set foot in caves, no matter the promised treasure. Well, sit down. Divines know you've pestered me for so long. So I'll tell you. I'll tell you of that fateful night in the Gerald Mountains, when greed led us into darkness. And that price that we paid, it still haunts me. There were 3 of us then, a motley crew of smugglers, bound by necessity and profit. There was Skarn, a burly Nord with a scar splitting his chin, who laughed louder than any man covered with gold like a dragon. Jadan was a Khajiit, quick hands, quiet steps. Whiskers would always twitch at any hint of danger. And then there was me. I was the youngest of the lot, a Breton. I fancied myself clever enough to cheat the Jarls, and even the Divines. I was a fool. We had fled south from Windhelm, with packs full of contraband, silks, moon sugar, a chest of stolen silver ingots, searching for any place to lay low and stash our loot, at least until those damn patrols passed. The evening sun was sinking low, and we trekked into the wilds, leaving the last roads and homesteads behind. Eventually we found an unmarked cave, half hidden behind frost-crusted pines and a tumble of boulders. Remote enough that no guard patrol would find us, and deep enough to conceal the contraband. Skarn grunted in approval as we stood before the dark maw of the cavern. A damp, earthy smell wafted out, tinged with something acrid and rotten. Jadan's tail, I remember seeing it flick nervously. He always gave himself away. This one smells old death. And spiders, he muttered, nose wrinkling. Those Khajiit senses, they were always stronger than ours. I didn't doubt that he was right. But spiders, they were common enough in Skyrim's cave. Nasty, sure, but nothing 3 armed smugglers couldn't handle. A couple of swings of the axe, that ought to do it. I forced a grin, and I clapped Jadan's shoulder. Better spiders than guards, eh? I'll take webs over shackles any day. My attempt at humor rang hollow in the quiet air, but Judan managed a weak chuckle. I even caught Skarn smirking a little. Torch in hand, I led the way inside. The cave walls were narrow at first, forcing Skarn, the tall Nord, to duck his head and mutter a few curses under his breath. Before long, the passage widened into a rough chamber. Our torchlight danced on tattered cobwebs draping the ceiling like a ghostly banner. A chittering sound echoed. Yeah, a sure sign of frostbite spiders lurking above. Time to keep our wits about us. You never know when one of them can drop down. And sure enough, 2 of them dropped from their perches as we stepped forward, each of them the size of a wolf. Horrible things. Their 8 terrible eyes gleamed and pincers clacked. Damn spiders. Skarn drew his sword with a metallic scrape. Come on then, you ugly creatures, he roared. One spider lunged, as if he almost understood what the Nord was saying, spitting a wad of poisonous venom. I sidestepped it by a hair. Judan was already loosing an arrow. The shaft hit home, sinking into the spider's bristly abdomen. It let out a otherworldly hiss. The second spider charged at Skarn. He met it head-on, slashing furiously. A limb flew off, and then another. The creature shrieked, until with a final swing, Skarn split its carapace, spilling foul ichor across the stone. Divines, the smell of it. The remaining spider scuttled towards me, fangs dripping. I jabbed my torch at it. The fire ought to keep it at bay, and drew my short sword with my free hand. As it reared up to strike, a second arrow from Judan whistled past my ear and buried itself into the spider's clustered eyeballs. The beast shuddered, collapsing in a twitching heap at my feet, pathetic. Just like that, in moments, it was over. The cavern fell silent once more, save for our heavy breathing, and as I caught my breath, I saw the floor littered with bones and desiccated carcasses, the remains of the spider's victims, likely skeevers and other small creatures. I wiped a splatter of green venom off my sleeve, grateful it hadn't eaten through the leather. Skarn looked at me and grunted. Old death and spiders. You called it, Judan. Those Ghajiit senses are sharp. The Ghajiit offered a tight, toothy grin. This one wishes he had been wrong, he replied. And so we caught our breath and ventured deeper into the cave. A tunnel at the back of the chamber beckoned onward, sloping down. The acrid smell grew stronger with each step, as if it were nearing the source of some long-decayed filth. On the walls, I noticed strange symbols etched into the stone. Curves and whirls that looked eerily like a Daedric script. A chill crawled up my spine at the sight of them. Spiders don't write that. The passage opened into a second cavern larger than the last. As our torchlight pierced the gloom, we all stopped in our tracks. An altar of obsidian stone stood at the far end, flanked by 2 rough-hewn pillars. Above it loomed a carved relief on the cave wall, a skein of interwoven spiderwebs framing a curved, feminine figure with 8 elongated limbs radiating outward. The sculpture's blank stone eyes almost seemed to watch us, and its carven grin was equal parts seductive as sinister. All round the altar lay scattered gold coins that glittered invitingly. Among the coins were other offerings, a silver chalice, a few rough-cut gems, and at the center of it all, on the altar's surface, an ornate ebony bowl filled to the brim with gold. Cobwebs draped the corner of that chamber, yet the altar and its treasures were conspicuously free of dust or web, as if tended regularly or recently disturbed. I also spied what looked like dark stains of old blood marred across the stone floor in front of the shrine. Divines, I breathed, scarcely believing what I saw. It was as though we had stumbled into a secret treasure vault. Skarn's eyes lit up, his earlier frustration forgotten in an instant. "Now what's all this, then?" he muttered, stepping forward eagerly. Jadaan hung back, ears flat against his skull. "This one does not like this place," he whispered. His voice was nearly lost in the hush of the cave. "These markings, they are no shrine of the divines. This is something else, something old, something wrong." "Daedric," I said, finally finding my voice. I sheathed my sword and stepped forward slowly, trying to recall my old temple lessons and my mother's fireside stories. Surely there was some truth in them. The spider motif and twisted script tugged at my memory. I think it's a shrine to Mephala, the Daedric prince of secrets and lies. The web spinner. I recalled tales of that one, how she delights in strife, weaving conspiracies and turning allies against each other for sport. At that, Jadaan's eyes widened even more. "Mephala," he hissed, using the Khajiiti name, the clan mother of dark secrets. Many of my people won't even speak that name, Mephala. Oh, we should leave this place now. Skarn had already crossed the chamber, drawn like a moth to the gleam of gold. He paused only briefly to sneer back at us. Mephala, Mephala, superstitious nonsense. He pointed his sword at the piles of coins. "Look at it. That looks real enough to me. If some fool pilgrims left it here for a spider god, that's their loss," he said with a growing grin. We reached the altar and kicked aside a small skull, perhaps some long-dead skeever, making room to shovel coins into his greedy hands. I flinched, half expecting lightning to strike him down for the sacrilege. But nothing happened. The cave remained still, the statue's empty gaze watching us in silence. Jadaan's tail lashed anxiously. "Brother, be careful. This one has heard ill tales of those who offend the Daedra. Such treasures are not abandoned. They are tribute, or even bait." Skarn laughed, a booming sound that seemed to make the shadows quiver. "Old Khajiit's fairy tales," he said, though I detected a strain between that bravado. "Help me with this, will you? Or have you forgotten how much you love gold?" I exchanged a glance with Jadaan. My heart was pounding. It just didn't feel right. Every instinct told me that this was a bad idea, but the very air in the chamber was thick with temptation. There must have been hundreds of septums gleaming at our feet. It's more than any of us had seen in one place, enough to live like kings for a while. I knelt and picked up a coin. It felt ice cold against my skin, far colder than coin should be. Maybe we should leave an offering in return, I murmured nervously. You know, to pay respect. Skarn shot me an incredulous look. You idiot, you're as skittish as the cat. He waved a hand dismissively. I'm not leaving a single septum behind. If you're that worried, say a prayer and let's be off. His greed was infectious. I hated that I felt it too, and a part of me knew that this was folly, yet I found myself moving to help Skarn gather the coins. Albeit, I realized my hands were trembling. Perhaps foolishly, I rationalized that if we cleared out this shrine quickly and left, whatever curse or creature dwelled within might not catch us. Just grab the gold and go. That was the plan forming in my head. Judan remained at the edge of the chamber, his eyes darting between us and the dark corners of the ceiling. The web spinner watchers, I heard him mutter under his breath, as if warding off evil. At last, even he could not resist entirely. I saw him creep forward and snatch up a large emerald that lay glittering on the stone. He turned it over in his hand, the green light reflected in his anxious eyes. We worked in silence, fast and nervous. I felt an oppressive weight around us, as though the darkness itself had trained on our every moment. In the flicker of my torch, the carved figure on the wall, the likeness of Mafana, had almost seemed to shift, its shadowy limbs twitching at the edge of sight as we plundered her offerings. And I dared not look directly at that statue's face, afraid I might see it scowling, or even worse, a grin smile. Soon enough, we had taken every last coin and trinket. We stuffed the gold into our packs, mixing it with our own loot. Skarn hefted the ornate ebony bowl for a moment, as if considering taking it too, but it was solid and heavy, so he let it clatter back on the altar. A bit too bulky to carry around, he grunted. Still, he was beaming like a child on a Saturnalia morning. All right, lads, we've hit the jackpot. Let's get a fire going and some food in our stomachs. We'll divvy it up once we're safely away from this dank hole. None of us wanted to remain in that chamber a moment longer. We hurried back up to the tunnel that we became, hearts pounding with a mix of triumph and dread. I was the last to leave, and as I stepped out of the shrine room, I swore I felt a sudden chill breeze at the back of my neck. It was as if something had rushed up behind me. I spun around, torch raised, but there was nothing but that darkness, and the faint outline of that statue, now draped in the shadow. If Mafala was watching, she gave no sign then, but I felt a prickling unease that didn't even fade after we returned to our makeshift camp near the cave's entrance. We made a camp in the outer cavern, as we had fought the spiders in. The air there felt a little less oppressive, though in truth, safety was an illusion now. Judan lit a small cooking fire while I unrolled the bedrolls. Skarn paced near the pile of our combined loot, his eyes never straying far from the sacks of coin. Our supper of dry bread and tufted jerky was a usual joyless affair, but a heavy silence hung over us, broken only by the crackle of the fire and distant drips of water. Finally, Judan whispered, "We should not have taken those coins." Skarn shot him a sharp look, but held his tongue. I stared into the flames, the weight of Judan's simple statement settling coldly into my gut. He voiced what we all feared, yet none of us knew how to undo it. And so we fell silent again, each lost in uneasy thought. After a while, Skarn stood up and tapped the pommel on his sword. "I'll take the first watch," he grunted. "Not tired anyway. You get some rest. We move at dawn." I suspected the real reason he wanted to take the first watch was sitting right beside him. The treasure. Perhaps he feared that one of us might try and run off with the share in the night. Given the whispers of mistrust Mephala was no doubt already sowing in our hearts, maybe he wasn't too wrong to worry. Regardless, neither Jadaan nor I argued. We were just exhausted, and dawn was not so many hours off. I stretched out on the cold stone, my cloak pulled tight around me, and tried to find some sleep. Across the fire, Jadaan curled up into his own cloak, though I saw his eyes remain open, reflecting the firelight for a long while. In the darkness, I could have sworn I heard something, a soft sigh, wafting through the tunnel from the deeper cave. I held my breath, listening keenly, but heard nothing more than a faint drip of water and an errant breeze. Shaking it off his nerves, I pulled my cloak tighter and closed my eyes. At some point, I drifted into a fitful sleep and dreamt I was back in that shrine chamber. In the dream, I stood before the obsidian altar, transfixed by the gleam of gold piled up. Greed tugged at me, and I reached out to grasp a coin, but the moment my fingers touched it, the gold melted into gossamer threads that came alive and whipped around my wrist. I tried to pull back, but more silken strands burst from the shadows, ensnaring my arms, legs, and eventually my throat. I couldn't scream. I struggled, I panicked, as a cold, feminine voice whispered from the darkness with a cruel laugh. "Little fly, you're already in my web." I couldn't see who spoke, but I sensed a vast shape moving just beyond the edge of sight, a spindly silhouette with too many eyes, watching me thrash in vain. The unseen silk tightened, cutting into my skin. My vision began to darken. "Struggle all you like," the disembodied voice purred. "You'll only bind yourself tighter." I jolted awake with a gasp, heart hammering against my ribs. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The fire had died down to embers, painting the cavern in a weak red light. That air, it was still cold. I sat up, trying to shake off the nightmare. And that's when I noticed Skarn's silhouette on the far side of the dim camp. He was standing eerily still, looming over something on the ground. My breath caught in my throat, just as my eyes adjusted. Skarn had his back to me, but at his feet I saw Jadaan lying motionless on his bedroll. A sickening dread surged through me. I scrambled up. "Skarn, what are you doing?" Skarn whirled at the sound of my voice. In one hand he clutched his dagger, and it was dripping with blood. On the ground, Jadaan's eyes stared sightlessly at the cave ceiling. A dark red gash slashed across his throat. A pool of blood was spreading beneath his body, black in the faint firelight. I clapped a hand over my mouth to hold back a cry. Everything spun. Our friend, cautious and gentle Jadaan. He lay dead before me, murdered. Skarn's chest was heaving. His face was a mask of confusion and anger, twisted in the flickering shadow. Skarn blurted out, his voice ragged. He He was trying to take it. I woke and caught him stuffing a sack with the gold. He was gonna steal it. He was gonna leave us. He was gonna steal the gold. He glanced down at Judan's body, and then quickly away, as if unable to look at what he'd done. I had to stop him. I didn't have a choice. It had to be done. Divines, that damned cat. He was sleeping, Skarn, I hissed, grief and fury warring in my heart. My hands trembled at my sides. Judan wasn't betraying anyone. You've gone mad. The shrine's poison is in your mind. Skarn's face spasmed, and for a moment I saw uncertainty in his eyes. But then he bared his teeth, gripping the dagger tighter. Mad? You didn't see him. I know what I saw, and I heard her voice as clear as a bell. It said he'll cut your throat if you don't cut his first. His gaze darted about in the dark, as if searching for that whispering presence. Maybe it was Mephala herself, the Prince of Plots. Maybe the data was on my side, showing me the truth. That damned cat was gonna slit our throats. They're all like that, you know. They all just want the gold. Damned greedy cats. I realized with horror what had happened. Mephala's influence was truly at work, weaving suspicion and fury into Skarn's heart. Judan had likely done nothing, but perhaps stir in his sleep a little, and Skarn, driven by the dangerous whisper, had imagined the worst and acted with deadly violence. She had ensnared us, after all, turning friend against friend, exactly what the old stories warned about. My hand inched toward my sword lying toward my bedroll. Skarn, listen to yourself, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Look at this place. It's cursed. You know it. I know it. We took her gold, and now she's turned us on each other. It's obvious what's happened, but it's not too late. Leave the gold. We can get out of here and leave it, he snarled, eyes flashing. Oh, never. I'm never letting go of this gold. We paid in blood for this. He gestured wildly at Judan's lifeless corpse, and I saw his hand was shaking. I'm not walking away empty-handed. It's mine now. It's mine. His voice echoed harshly off the stone walls. He was beyond reason. In the dim light spattered with his friend's blood, he was a man possessed. Perhaps he really was. Without another word, Skarn lunged to the pile of loot and hoisted the largest sack of gold onto his back. Another pack, stuffed with our stolen merchandise and more coins, went over his other shoulder. He winced. Only then did I see Judan's curved dagger protruding from Skarn's thigh. It seemed that in Judan's final moments, he'd managed to fight back. Skarn, so crazed with adrenaline, he didn't even seem to feel the wound. He yanked that bloody dagger out of his leg with a grunt and tossed it aside. Then he turned to face me, burdened with treasure, yet towering and fearsome. Get out of my way, he growled. Try to stop me, and I'll kill you just like I killed him. He jerked his chin towards Judan's lifeless form, and my blood ran cold. Skarn began limping toward the tunnel that led up and out into the night, determined to leave with his ill-gotten riches. If he escaped, I'd no doubt Mephala's curse would follow him, and perhaps doom anyone he encountered. Where would that leave me? Alone in the dark, with my murdered friend, and likely marked by a Daedra's wrath myself. I couldn't let him go, I couldn't. Gathering every ounce of my courage, I drew my sword and stepped into the tunnel mouth, blocking the Nord's way. I can't let you leave with it, I said, surprised at how my voice sounded, given the terror coursing through me. My blade trembled in my hand. Skarn, listen to me. Put it down. We have to end this. We have to make it right. Skarn's lips peeled back in a snarl. So that's how it is it? He spat. First the cat, now you, everyone turning on me. He let the sacks of loot drop to the ground with a metallic clatter. Fresh blood trickled down his leg, but he hardly seemed to notice or care. Fine, I'll cut you down too, and be the only one left to claim the fortune. More for me anyway. You idiot. You've chosen this. With a furious roar, Skarn charged at me. He swung one of the heavy coin-filled sacks at me like a mace, and I barely ducked aside as it whooshed past my ear and smashed into the cave wall. Coins spilled out in a shower. Skarn followed up with a slash of his dagger. I brought my sword up just in time, the blades colliding with a flash of sparks. Skarn, don't do this, I grunted, straining against his strength. The Nord was strong. So strong. But his only reply was a wordless snarl. He shoved me off and came at me with a flurry of brutal strikes. I parried them desperately, the clang of steel ringing through the cavern. Each blow from Skarn's blade jolted my arm to the shoulder. He was wounded and limping, but rage and adrenaline lent him power. I gave ground, step by step, retreating down the tunnel back to the shrine chamber as Skarn pressed the attack. My mind was racing. I didn't want to kill him. I wasn't even sure I could in a fair fight. But I had to defend myself, and something told me that as long as that cursed gold was with us, that none of us would leave this cave alive, and if we did, we wouldn't be sane. Skarn drove me into the larger cavern, our fight lit only by the faint glow of a dropped torch smouldering near the shrine's entrance. In the stumbling shadows, the great spider relief on the wall loomed over us, its 8 limbs outstretched as if urging us on in our deadly duel. I sidestepped a savage overhead chop. Skarn's dagger whistled past my ear and bit into the altar behind me, sticking there for a moment. That was it. This was my opportunity. I slashed at his thigh, aiming for the injury that Jadan had given him, and my blade found flesh. Skarn bellowed in pain and fell to one knee. Stop, Skarn, I cried out, panting. It's over. But he would not yield. With a raw howl, he ripped his dagger free of the altar and lurched back up, swinging wildly. I threw myself backward to avoid his strike, bumping hard into one of the stone support pillars flanking the shrine. Suddenly, a thunderous crack echoed through the cavern. In our frenzy, we must have compromised the cave's stability. The pillar behind me shifted, and tiny rocks rained from the ceiling. Both Skarn and I froze, eyes darting upward. The whole chamber shuddered ominously. A fissure split across the ceiling with a grinding noise. We had very little time before this place came down on our heads. Skarn's eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the old Nord still there. That old friend who'd laughed and shared a drink on cold nights. His face was a mix of agony and fear. Perhaps he realized what was about to happen, and what had to be done. He opened his mouth, not to yell, but as if to speak. I never found out what he meant to say, because with a deafening rumble, the ceiling began to collapse. A massive chunk of a rock crashed down between us, smashing the obsidian altar of Mephala to rubble. I staggered backwards, dust and debris filling the air. The last I saw of Skarn, he was reaching toward me through the haze, the expression twisted in despair as a cascade of boulders tumbled around him. And that decided it. I turned and ran. I never ran faster in my life. I sprinted for the tunnel, lungs and eyes burning with dust as the cavern behind me was swallowed by the falling rock. The floor bucked under my boots. I could barely see, but I chased the faint glimmer of moonlight ahead, the only guide toward the exit. The tunnel itself was collapsing now, jagged chunks of stone crashing down. I felt a blow to my shoulder as a rock clipped me, but I kept my footing. A boulder slammed into the ground just inches behind, the impact nearly throwing me off balance. With one final desperate burst, I hurled myself toward the pale light of the cave's mouth. I dove out into that cold night as the tunnel crumbled. A roaring avalanche of stone sealed the entrance right on my heels, belching a cloud of dust and grit into the pre-dawn sky. I rolled on the frosty grass, coughing, gasping. For a moment there I stayed on my back, staring up at the early dawn, unsure if I was really alive. And gradually, everything grew quiet. The only sound was the wind sighing through the pines and my own rasping breath. But I was alive. By some miracle, I'd survived. A choked laugh of disbelief escaped me, turning into a sob. In that moment, I realized I lost everything, except my life. When the dust had settled, the dawn light revealed nothing but a heap of fresh boulders where the cave had been. Beneath that rock lay Skarn and Jadan, and all the gold entombed together in the darkness. For a long moment, not even morning birds dared to sing. I was the only one left, empty-handed and alone. Slowly I got to my feet on my unsteady legs. My body ached head to toe, and warm blood trickled from a shallow cut on my upper arm, a graze from Skarn's blade that I realized numbly. The sky to the east was turning pink and gold as the sun crested the mountains. In that soft light, everything looked so peaceful. It felt jarringly unreal after the nightmare I had just endured. I offered a silent prayer for my fallen friends and for my own soul, and then turned back on that shattered hill and limped away. I wandered for hours through the wilderness in a daze until a passing hunter found me stumbling along a ridge. He kindly shared some water and gave me an escort back to the village on the road to Riften. That must have been a frightful sight, dust-covered and bloodied. I told the locals a fragmented tale of a bandit attack in a cave. They shook their heads at my misfortune and were generous enough to feed and shelter a wretch like me for the night. I had nothing to offer them except my thanks. Luckily, that was enough. In the days that followed, as I made my way in a haze back towards civilization, I replayed that night in my mind 1,000 times. How could have it all gone so wrong? Skarn's laughter, Jadan's caution, the whispers in the dark. Sometimes I wonder if I'd gone insane and imagined the whole thing. But the bruises on my body and the emptiness of my coin purse, that was evidence enough that it was all too real. We had taken Mephala's bait, and she had devoured us from within. And so now here I sit, a penniless traveler, with more scars to his name than coin, telling you this tale over a mug of ale. And that, friend, is why I look so ragged, why I startle at shadows and wake from nightmares of webs and spiders. I entombed the evil in that shrine and lived to tell the tale. Greed led us there, but only horror followed. I raise my mug now to Judan, who tried to warn us, and even to Skarn, who died cursing the gold he coveted. Divines have mercy on both of them. No amount of treasure is worth the price that we paid. So, if you ever come across gold hidden in some dark, forgotten place, think of my tale and leave it be. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, friend, and some treasure costs too much blood. I remember that night in solitude, as if it were etched behind my eyes. Even now, telling you over this mug of mead, my heart quickens recalling the chill wind off Garth River, and the thrill that still courses through me at the memory. Picture it. It was a night of moonless sky, draped over solitude's noble estates, its stone arches and proud towers stark against distant torchlight, and there I was, amongst it all, a bold fool, of a newcomer of sorts, pressed flat against a cold stone wall beneath a third-story window of Lord Arandur's manor, trying to still my breath. I was young, maybe a little bit too eager. I wanted to prove myself. I was convinced I was about to pull off the heist that would make my name echo in the ragged flagon back in Riften. Finally an opportunity to show my worth. But why Lord Arandur's manor? Well, the rumor said that he possessed a gilded relic, a jewel-encrusted idol, worth more than coin than most Nords can earn in a lifetime. For a fresh-faced thief looking to prove himself, it was the perfect mark. Prestigious and well-guarded enough to impress the guild if I succeeded. Yet, it's doable with a bit of daring. In fact, the guild master himself had slipped me the tip. Perhaps it's a challenge, musing over his mead that a bauble in solitude could fetch a king's ransom. Of course I took the bait. I was hungry to show them all that I, Casimir, the fool who regales you now, was destined for more than picking pockets in market stalls for a few coins. And so there I was, crouched in the shadows, casing the manner of a man powerful enough to have personal guards, and of course a few traps. Most of the lights were out at that late hour. Only a faint glow seeped out from the windows. I had already slipped past the outer patrols by timing their routes after nights of observation. The estate's high wall was nothing a coil of rope and nocturnal's luck couldn't handle. By midnight, I'd hauled myself up to a second-floor balcony, careful not to jingle a single buckle on my leather armor. I perched there, lockpicks in hand, ready to make my grand entrance. The window lock, it was a cheap contraption. Apprentices could open it by guild standards. It clicked open under my pick with almost an insulting crack. I eased the window up and slid into the manor's upper corridor, silent as a shadow. My boots sunk into a plush rug, muffling my landing. The air inside was warmer. It carried a hint of incense and aged wood. I allowed myself a small smirk in the darkness. So far, so good. I stood still and let my eyes adjust and ears attune for any signs of life. The hallway was long, lined with decorative alcoves and paintings. I could barely discern them in the gloom. A single wall sconce flickered at the far end, its low flame casting dancing shadows. From somewhere below drifted the muffled snores of a guard or servant, but nothing stirred up here. Perfect. Step by careful step, I crept forward. I knew from earlier scouting and a bribe to one of Arandu's maids roughly where the display room was. According to her gossip, the gilded idol, a supposed Akaviri antique shaped like a coiled dragon, was kept in a glass case in Lord Arandur's study on this very floor, not far from where I was prowling about. And that was my destination. Get in, snatch the idol, get out before anyone noticed. A classic job. But things are never that simple, and I was about to learn the hard way. Halfway down the corridor, I encountered my first surprise. Beneath one of those alcoves lay the prone figure of a man. My heart leapt into my throat. A body. I froze. Every instinct was screaming that it was a trap, and I flattened myself against the wall. The figure didn't move. Squinting, I saw it was a guard in a light cuirass, lying on his side. Dead? Asleep? I didn't know. An empty goblet, I observed, lay near his limp hand, and then the faint smell of spiced wine and something acrid hung in the air. I inched closer, nudged the guard's shoulder with 2 fingers. He slumped, letting out a deep, oblivious snore. Idiot. Not dead, just out cold. The sour hint of nightshade in the wine told the story. He'd been drugged, but not by me. A prickle of unease ran up my spine. This was not part of my plan. I intended to avoid any guards, or at most distract them briefly, and I certainly hadn't slipped anyone a sleeping draught. So who did? As I eased past the unconscious guard, adrenaline pounded anew in my ears. Someone else was here tonight. The thought was almost unbelievable. What were the odds? But it explained that conveniently unlatched servant's gate in the courtyard, which I had previously credited to luck, and that faint creak I'd dismissed as settling wood when I first climbed in. Could it be that servant with a grudge, stealing from their own master? Unlikely. Who drugs a guard to rob their employer? Nocturnal forbid. A rival. Another thief. The Thieves Guild doesn't take kindly to freelancers on our turf, but Solitude wasn't exactly flush with our presence. Our influence here was tenuous at best. Maybe some independent thief caught wind of the same rumor. Perhaps the guildmaster whispered it to more than one of us, turning it into a contest. I don't know. But that last notion made me grit my teeth. A competition mid-heist is how you end up at the wrong end of a sword, or rotting in Castle Dower's dungeons. I'm not sure which one is worse. I pushed the worry aside, however. Focus. Rival or not, the job remains. Grab the idol and get out. If someone else was here, I'd deal with them after I had the prize in hand. At least one guard was down courtesy of this mystery interloper, which inadvertently made my path easier, I must admit. So I crept onward, but now on high alert for any sign of that of a thief. Soon I reached a grand stairway curling down to the first floor, and just to the left of it, the double doors of what had to be Arandur's study. Heavy oak, engraved with ivy patterns, and an expensive-looking lock. This was it. Kneeling in the dark, I set to work with my picks on the lock, gently testing the mechanism for the sweet spot. Oh, but it was a complex piece. Likely only experts could get through this one. And each pin I lifted with delicate care, relishing the quiet clicks. 1, 2, 3. A sudden metallic clank echoed from downstairs, as if somebody knocked over something metal on stone. I flinched. My concentration broke, and snap! The lockpick broke in the keyhole with a loud tick that made me cringe. I held my breath, straining to listen. Muffled footsteps from below and a faint curse. I was not alone. I slipped out the broken pick fragment and was about to insert a new one when I heard a soft click from the other side of the door, the unmistakable sound of a latch turning. My eyes widened. Someone was inside, and they had just unlocked it from within. I barely had time to snatch my hand away from the knob before the door cracked open. In an instant, I pressed myself flat into the shadow of a tall dresser against the wall, heart thundering. A figure slipped out into the hallway not 2 paces from me. But the sconce's faint glow, I saw a hooded silhouette. The person was of average height, clad in dark leather armor like mine, a short sword at the hip. They moved with a predatory, practiced grace. Definitely not a clumsy servant. This was indeed a thief. And judging by how quickly they'd gotten into the study, a damn good thief, too. The thief paused just outside the study, peering down the hall and thankfully missing my shape in the shadows at his side. He crouched and examined the door's lock, which I had nearly picked, and gave a soft, amused grunt. And then I watched, equal parts impressed, equal parts infuriated, as he produced a small vial of oil and dabbed it into the keyhole and hinges. With a swift motion, he relocked the door behind him, ensuring that it looked completely untouched. Ah, the audacity. Not only had this intruder beaten me to the idol, he was covering his tracks to make it seem like no one had been here at all. My mind raced. He must have the idol on him, he must. I wasn't about to leave empty-handed after coming this far. My grip tightened on my dagger. I didn't plan on spilling blood tonight, but I needed to confront this rival and get that relic, one way or another. Just as I readied myself to pounce, fate took another turn. From the darkness below came a shout of alarm. "Who's up there? Show yourself!" It was a guard, alerted by that earlier noise, perhaps. Lantern lights swelled from the stairwell. The thief in front of me tensed, spinning toward the stairs. In doing so, his hood shifted, and I caught a glimpse of a lean face, a flash of a pale scar on his cheek, before he yanked the hood down again. He bolted away from the stairs and away from me, deeper into the second-floor halls. On impulse, and because I wasn't letting my prize disappear, I gave chase. A quiet heist had now become frantic. He sprinted through the corridors, and I followed. Both of us just dark shapes, flitting past the moonlight windows in suits of armor on display. He clearly knew the manor's layout. He led me through a side passage and down a narrower servant stairwell. I was fast and determined, slowly gaining on him with each stride. Below, the guard shouts grew louder, but now with multiple voices echoing in. Someone rang a bell, a heavy, resonant clang, That meant the alarm was truly raised. The whole estate would be swarming soon. My chest was tight with panic, but I forced it down. Focus on the thief ahead and the exit after. One thing at a time. He hit the bottom of the servants' stairs and burst into a large pantry. Shelves stocked with dried goods. Wine casks loomed in the dark. I was right on his heels. Desperate, I lunged, grabbing a fistful of his cloak. The fabric tore as he twisted away, spinning to finally face me. We squared off in that little room, both breathing hard but silent. In the dim light from a single hanging lantern, I could make out more of my rival. A man possibly in his late 30s. Short dark hair streaked by a little silver, his angular face set in scowl, and a scar ran from his temple to cheek. He held a short sword low and ready, and in his offhand I glimpsed a cloth pouch that was likely holding the idol I sought. "You've got quick feet," he whispered, voice edged with irritation. "But you picked the wrong damn night to crash my job, boy." "Boy," I hissed back, insulted despite the situation. I wasn't exactly a child, maybe mid-20s, but compared to his grizzled demeanor, I admit I must have seemed new to it. "Drop that pouch. It belongs to the guild." He snorted, eyes flicking toward noises beyond the pantry door. If the guild wanted this trinket so badly, they should have sent someone better than you, boy. Anger flared in me. We began circling each other slowly between crates of salted fish and flour sacks, each sizing the other up. We didn't have time for a prolonged duel, but neither of us was going to back down. He feinted. I sidestepped, my dagger versus his sword in a quick exchange that rang steel on steel. Oh, divines, he was good. He was very good. A few swift passes, and I knew I couldn't outfence him with sheer skill. I'd have to get creative. From the hall outside the pantry came crashing footsteps and a beam of light under the door. The guards were closing in. We both realized if we keep fighting, we'd be caught in minutes. Still, neither of us was willing to surrender the idol. He darted suddenly toward the pantry's opposite exit that led deeper into the house, probably hoping to lose me or slip out another way. Not so fast. I slashed wildly to keep him back, and then with a burst of inspiration I kicked a heavy wooden barrel sitting on the floor toward him. It wasn't full, but it was heavy enough to make him leap aside and avoid his shins being smashed. In that blink, I rushed him. We grappled, knocking over a shelf of crockery in the process. The crash of pots was deafening. So much for stealth. In our tussle, I managed to elbow his wrist. The cloth pouch flew from his hand and slid under a shelf. My heart lurched. This was our prize skittering away into the dark. He shoved me back against the toppled barrel, cursing. We both dove to the ground at the same time, scrambling for the treasure. My fingers found it first, closed around it. Triumphantly, I yanked it to my chest and rolled away, coming up to a crouch. He was on his feet in a heartbeat, blade pointed at me. I hopped back, clutching the precious pouch in one hand, dagger raised in the other. "Looks like it's my lucky night after all, old man," I said, unable to resist a taunt, my breath ragged. He gave a low growl and advanced a step, and I could see in his eyes he was weighing whether to gut me or snatch the pouch and cut his losses and run. Before he could decide, the pantry door banged open. 2 guards rushed in, one with drawn sword, the other with lantern and axe. They spotted us immediately. Hard to miss in the lantern's beam. "Drop your weapons," The lead guard barked, an Imperial with gleaming sword trained on us. Behind him a burly Nord with the axe, ready to cleave us in two. For one surreal moment, the thief and I, mortal enemies a second ago, exchanged a glance of mutual dread. Neither of us was getting that idol out of here, if we were captured or killed. And so without a word, we reached an unspoken agreement. I hurled a small ceramic flash bomb at the guard's feet, a parting gift I'd intended for an emergency. It exploded in a burst of light and smoke, causing the guards to shout in confusion, blinded. "Run!" my rival spat at me, and we were already bolting out the second door of the pantry. He was right beside me. We sprinted down a side corridor from the dazed guard's sudden allies in a bid to escape. We took a twisting route through the manor's back passage. I had the advantage of having scouted a bit. I led us toward what I hoped was a kitchen door that opened to the outside. Behind us, shouts rang out as more guards joined the chase. My lungs burned from exertion, but I clutched the pouch like my life depended on it, and it probably did. And so we burst into the kitchen, empty, dark, smelling of yesterday's stew. There, a heavy wooden door with a big iron latch likely led to a yard or delivery entrance. I rushed to it and lifted the latch. Locked, or barred from the outside. I groaned, jiggling it uselessly. No time to pick this either. Garrus, the name I'd soon learn he went by, scanned the room and pointed to a stairwell leading down. "Cellar! The cellar!" he snapped. With guards nearly upon us, we flew down into the cellar, feet thundering on old wooden steps. It was pitch black, the smell of mold and spilled wine thick. I heard him fumbling and then the scratch of a flint, a tiny spark, and a glow as he lit half-burnt torches from a wall bracket. The cellar lit up in flickering orange, crates and barrels everywhere, old furniture covered in sheets, stone walls enclosing us. We darted behind a small stack of crates just as our pursuers reached the kitchen above. Through the cracks in the floorboards, we heard them splitting up, some charging outside, others heading down after us. My eyes desperately searched for an escape. And there, at the far end of the cellar, a faint draught whispered through a seam in the stone. I grabbed the other thief's arm and pointed. We dashed over and pushed aside a wine rack, revealing a narrow door set into the wall. It was unlocked. Perhaps in the chaos the servants had a thought to secure this old escape tunnel. Or maybe it was deliberately left open as part of his twisted game. A bitter thought. Slipping through, we found ourselves in a cramped tunnel barely tall enough to stand in. I pulled the door shut, just as I heard boots hitting the bottom of the cellar stairs. In the darkness we hurried, stooped low, through the unknown passage. We could hear muffled shouts behind, but as we put distance, those faded. The tunnel wound on, damp and claustrophobic. After a minute, I dared whisper, "I hope this leads somewhere other than a dead end." My rival, no, my sudden partner, grunted quietly. "It has to. Likely an escape route outside the city walls." He was right. After a few twists and turns, a weak bluish light appeared ahead. The tunnel ended at a small cave opening covered by hanging moss. Beyond, we saw the night sky and trees. We crawled out into the cold air, emerging on a wooden slope just behind the estate, right outside Solitude's walls. We tumbled out, muddy and out of breath, but free. For a long moment, we both simply lay on our backs in the brush, catching our breath and savoring the fact that we were alive, or at least not in chains. Distant voices from the estate and the faint alarm bells were the only reminders of the chaos we had left behind. Eventually, I propped myself up on my elbows and looked over at the older thief. He sat up, removing his hood at last. In the faint moonlight, I saw his features more clearly, and an expression of weariness and wry amusement mixed together with the keen blue eyes and scar on his cheek. "Well," I panted, "that could have gone worse." He gave a raspy chuckle. "It could have gone better, too. You almost cost me my score." I bristled, but managed a tired smirk. "Your score? If I recall, I'm the one holding it now." I patted the pouch still clutched to my chest. He sheathed his sword and held up his hands mildly. "Easy. We got bigger problems, like nearly getting hanged for theft. Let's move before they widen the search. It's time to get out of here." Well, that was true enough. We staggered to our feet and moved further into the cover of trees and rocky outcrops. When we were confident no patrols were immediately nearby, we paused in the shadow of a larger boulder to finally examine our hard-won prize. My hands were trembling slightly, maybe from adrenaline or excitement, who knows, as I opened the pouch and drew out the idol. Moonlight gleamed on gold and ruby. The coiled dragon idol, small enough to fit in my palm, but it looked every bit as exquisite as the rumors claimed. Finally, a moment of victory, I grinned, turning it over and over. "All that trouble for this," I murmured. The older thief stepped closer, peering at it. His eyes narrowed. He reached out a fingertip and ran one over the tiny ruby eyes. But to my shock, the ruby moved under the pressure. Just colored glass, glued in place, and the supposed gold plating had a scratch, revealing a dull brass beneath. My mouth went dry. "It's a fake." He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. It's a decoy. Damn it." He must have suspected something. His reaction was grim, but not too surprised. I, on the other hand, felt a surge of anger. We nearly got killed or captured for such a worthless bloody trinket. I growled, hardly believing it. I had an impulse to hurl the thing off the damn cliffside. The veteran thief folded his arms, staring at the phony relic. I had my doubts when I noticed there were no serious protections around it. One sleepy guard, a basic display case. It smelled like a setup. The rich aren't that stupid. They hide their treasures a bit better. He looked at me, and I saw a realization dawn in his eyes that likely mirrored my own. "The Guild Master," we both said almost in unison. He nodded grimly. This was a test, or perhaps even a lesson. My anger cooled into astonishment. It all fit. The Guildmaster tipping me off, likely sending this guy too, making sure that we would collide. The fake idol, planted as bait. I let out a breathless laugh. That bloody skeever. He played us. The older thief managed a wry smile. "Yeah, it sounds like the Guildmaster's style." He extended a hand to me at last. "My name's Garrus, by the way. Former guild, long ago." He roped me in with promises of a big score, you know. Should have known it was more than it seemed. I shook his hand firmly. "Casimir, newcomer to the guild, as you probably guessed. He smirked. Yeah, I guessed. But you've got guts, Casimir, and some skill, I'll admit it. Many would have botched this a lot worse than you did. I gave a half shrug. Yeah, well, likewise, without you, that mess back there would have ended uglier for me. Teamwork wasn't exactly what either of us planned tonight, Gareth said. But it looks like that's what saved our hides. And I suspect that's exactly what our dear guildmaster wanted to see. Likely hoping we'd either learn to cooperate or knock each other off, I muttered. In truth, I could imagine the guildmaster smirking to himself, hearing how we escaped together. He was probably more interested in forging alliances and spilling blood. Probably. Gareth sighed and gestured toward the dim outline of Solitude's walls. I don't fancy trekking back in there right now. They'll be on high alert. I have a little hideout down by the river where we can lay low until morning. Normally I'd be wary of following a stranger, especially one who earlier had his knife ready to stab me. But after what we'd been through, I felt I knew his character well enough. We'd saved each other back there at least, and that's got to say something. We made our way carefully through the dark, skirting the edges of Solitude. As we walked, I asked, "So what now? We show up in Riften and throw this fake idol at the guildmaster's feet?" Gareth chuckled. Something like that. The real treasure tonight turned out to be something else. Let me guess. Friendship, I quipped dryly. He laughed, a quiet sound. Maybe so, or at least partnership. You're not half bad, Casimir. With some mentoring, you could make a name for yourself in the guild, for real. If you're willing, I wouldn't mind working together on a few jobs going forward. And that was surprising, and I was a bit surprised at how much it actually pleased me. I'd been so set on proving myself alone, but having a partner, especially one so skilled as Gareth, well, that certainly had its appeal. I replied with a grin. I think I could agree to that, but I have one condition. If we get another tip about a golden idol, or some too-good-to-be-true heist, we double-check it 6 ways before jumping in. Gareth barked a subdued laugh. Yeah, sure, Casimir. That's a deal. By the time the horizon was glowing light, we'd hunkered down in his modest hideout, a small abandoned cabin by the riverside. As we finally rested, I couldn't help but marvel at the night's events. So here, I am telling you this tale. 2 thieves went in as rivals after the same prize, only to find the whole thing was a damned ruse. In the end, we escaped empty-handed but alive, and I gained something far more valuable than gold, a trusted partner, a mentor. I might even dare call him a friend. The guildmaster got his twisted little experiment, and we got a lesson in humility and teamwork. A dramatic night, that's to be sure. Gritty, chaotic, not all as planned. But that's life in the Thieves' Guild, isn't it? We live on our wits, and a bit of luck from Lady Nocturnal. If that's not enough, then I don't know what else to give. And so, friend, when I raise this mug of mead and toast to unlikely alliances, you know that I speak from real experience. The Rival Thieves, they called us that in the aftermath. We wear it like a badge of honor now. After all, a rivalry can become a hell of a partnership when all's said and done. You're so damn persistent, aren't you? I wasn't planning on telling anyone what happened out in the marsh that night. You just had to keep prodding. Fine, I'll spill it. But just keep it to yourself. I don't want it making the rounds in the taverns. I suppose it's not like anyone would believe it anyway. Starts off just like any other job. Delvin sliding a scrap of paper my way in the back corner of the flagon. Special request, he muttered, eyes glinting under the hood of his cloak. Even in that dim candlelight, I could see a writ detailed a target near Riften. Some crew of smugglers had made off with a valuable item. My task: slip in, liberate the item, and get out clean. Pretty standard burglary. At least, on paper. I should have known from the way Delvin avoided meeting my eyes that there was a little bit more to it. He usually cracks a wry joke while giving me the job details, but this time he was all business. So, Delvin, what's the catch? I asked, tracing a finger over the parchment. There's always a catch. Client secretive, Delvin shrugged, lowering his voice. Pays extremely well for this idol to be returned. Doesn't want the city guard involved. He paused and then added, he also said to warn you, it's Daedric. Daedric. Just the word sent a chill down my spine. As a rule, I don't fancy dealing with anything touched by the princes of oblivion. Too many horror stories. Cursed rings. Mad kings. But then again, coin is coin. And the Thieves Guild reputation was riding on satisfying this anonymous client. It was no time to be turning away business. I could almost feel Mercer's glare from across the room, though he wasn't actually there. He'd been scarce lately on guild business. Still, failing wasn't an option if I wanted to keep my standing. So I smirked like I wasn't fazed. An idol, is it? Well, Daedric or not, it'll be in our vault by morning, I guarantee it. Bravado had always been a friend to me, even when common sense screamed otherwise. Delvin gave a tight nod. Perhaps he knew it was all for show, too. Then he returned to nursing his Flynn, leaving me to prepare. By dusk, I was geared up and moving. I left Riften through a hidden grate behind the docks, slipping into the wild underbelly of the rift. The city lights dwindled behind me as I crept along deer paths and game trails, guided only by moonlight and memory. I knew the general area the smugglers were camped in, somewhere in the marshes just north of Lake Honrick's eastern tip, where the land turns to suckling mud and fetid ponds. Not the most comfortable place for a midnight stroll, that's for sure. The further I got from Riften, the quieter the world became. No city watch, no rambling drunks, just the chirr of crickets and the occasional hoot of a night owl. Under the canopy of gnarled trees, the air hung damp and cold. Patches of mist clung to the ground like pale shrouds. Each step sank my boots into black mud that tried to hold on and take them, making a soft, wet suction as I pulled them free. I moved carefully, keeping my footsteps as silent as possible. I skirted a stagnant pool where a ghostly blue nernroot glimmered at the water's edge, its chiming hum the only sign of life. A wilting death bell nearly looked like a warning to turn back, but I just gripped my dagger and pressed onward. After about an hour of trudging through half-submerged reeds and threading between twisted, half-dead trees, I spotted a faint orange glow bobbing through the fog ahead. It was the light of a fire, unmistakable. I crouched behind the mossy trunk of a fallen pine and peered through the cattails. Sure enough, a camp sprawled on a dry patch of ground rising above the muck, maybe 100 paces off. I could make out the silhouettes of 4 tents and the dark shapes of crates piled up haphazardly. A flickering bonfire crackled at the center, sending sparks spiraling up to challenge the starlight. The smugglers were still awake, but not exactly on high alert. I spied one of them, a red-guard man by the looks of his outline, staggering from the fire toward the tent, a bottle in hand. Skooma or ale, I couldn't tell. But either way, they were indulging in their spoils, celebrating early. Idiots. 2 more figures lingered near the bonfire. One was hunched over a crate, fiddling with something, likely examining a piece of the loot by firelight. The other was a burly Nord leaning on a tree, his laughter booming across the camp at some unheard joke. Even from my hiding spot, I could detect the smell of sweat, the pungent tang of skooma. They were definitely in their cups and pipes, that's for sure. Good. That just makes the job a whole lot easier. Drunken thieves. They're easier to sneak past. Usually with a crew like this, they'd post at least 1 sentry on watch, especially after making off with the valuable contraband. But as I circled slowly around the camp's perimeter to get a better view, I realized I hadn't seen a single lookout. Overconfidence. Or just stupidity. Either way, I wasn't going to complain. I crept from shadow to shadow, inching closer to the largest tent. There I spotted an ornate golden chest on the ground with its lid thrown open and its interior empty, likely where they'd kept the idol. Not a good sign. If they'd taken the idol out to admire it, it could be anywhere in the camp now. Just as I was considering my approach, perhaps a lob a stone to draw the pair by the fire away and then slip into the big tent, there was a blood-curdling scream that ripped through the night. I froze. The scream came from somewhere on the far side of the camp, beyond the tents. It was a man, shrill and panicked, the kind of sound that makes your skin prickle and your gut turn to knots. The camp fell silent, aside from the crackle of the fire. The 2 by the bonfire jolted upright. The red guard who had just stumbled into his tent came rushing back out, nearly tripping over the threshold. "What in oblivion was that?" one of them shouted. I used the chaos to slide a few steps closer, ducking behind an overturned rowboat that must have been dragged here for seating. My heart thudded, not from fear of being seen, but from the raw terror in that scream. It hadn't sounded like someone being attacked. No, it was a pure, unhinged fear. Voices in the camp tangled themselves up in confusion. Through the gloom, I saw a 4th smuggler emerge from a small pup tent, buckling on a sword belt. "Where's Ingvar? He was on watch," the Nord leader barked, snatching a torch from the fire. So there had been a sentry after all, and if that scream was Ingvar, something had gone very, very wrong. The Nord and one of the others, a Bosmer woman by her slight stature, began moving toward the end of the camp, where the scream had come from. The Nord held the torch high, his other hand gripping a sword, while the Bosmer followed with an arrow nocked to the bowstring. The remaining 2, the Red Guard and a stocky Imperial, hovered near the bonfire, weapons drawn, but looking uncertain which way to go. I pressed myself against the hull of the old boat as the Nord and Bosma just passed a dozen paces from me. The torch cast wild shadows on the trees. I held my breath, thankful for the fog that cloaked me. For a few heartbeats, the only sounds were their heavy breaths and the distant squish of the Nord's boots in the mud. But then a new noise reached us. Faint, muffled and sobbing. It was coming from the darkness, where the two were headed. The Nord called out, voice wavering slightly, "Ingvar, is that you?" No response, just that sobbing and a wet choke. I inched around the boat to keep them in sight. The torchlight bobbed and then stopped. I could just make out the Nord's broad back as he stood at the base of the dead tree. "Divines, Ingvar, what happened to you?" I heard him say, horror in his tone. The Bosma edged beside him, bow still raised. Suddenly, the night erupted into chaos. A second scream, this time the Nord's, split the air, only to be cut short with a sickening gurgle. The torch dropped to the ground, its flame illuminating a spray of blood across the fog. The Bosma cried out in surprise, releasing an arrow blindly into the darkness. "Ambush! We're under attack!" The Imperial by the fire shouted, panic rising in his voice. The Redguard cursed and stumbled backwards, away from the dark tree line. From my vantage by the boat, I had a partial view of the carnage beyond. In the sputtering torch glow, I saw the Nord leader collapse, his throat slashed open by nothing. There was no attacker visible. Ingvar, the missing sentry, was on his knees nearby, but, well, he wasn't fighting anyone. He was clawing at his own face, wailing in terror. There was no sign of any assailant, mortal or beast. No arrows in the Nord, no sneaking bandits that I could see. The Bosma woman was circling frantically, trying to cover every direction with her bow. Ingvar just kept wailing, "No more, no more," and tearing at his hair. She stepped towards Ingvar, confusion and fear written in her stance. "Ingvar, snap out of it! What's attacking us?" she shouted. In response, Ingvar suddenly lunged at her. He tackled the Bosma to the ground with a crazed howl. They disappeared behind a clump of ferns, but I heard her bow clatter, and her scream turn into a choking gasp. My mouth was as dry as tundra sand. This wasn't an ambush. At least, not by any mortal band of cutthroats. Something else. Yes, it was toying with these people, driving them all mad. And I had a sick feeling that I knew what it was. The idol. A cursed Daedric idol in their hall. That was my job to retrieve. Delvin's warning about it being Daedric, that wasn't just a bit of caution. It was the key to this whole nightmare. While those idiots drank and laughed around it, the artifact had probably been working its evil on them, slowly tipping them into madness. Now it was happening fast, and perhaps irreversible. It was risky, but I saw an opening. The Bosma and the Nord were down. The only ones left were the Redguard and the Imperial by the fire, and they were utterly spooked. If I moved quickly and quietly, I could snatch the idol amid the confusion, be gone before they even realized somebody else was there. I darted from the boat to a low stack of sacks, moon sugar or salt or whatever illicit goods they'd been hauling. My eyes scanned the camp. The ornate chest I'd noted earlier was still outside the big tent, lid ajar and empty. Where was the idol itself? My gaze flickered to the bonfire and the crates around it. There, on a small crate right beside the fire pit, an object glinted gold and black. A statue, about a foot tall, its dark surface catching the firelight. That's it. That has to be it. The Redguard had regained his footing and was inching back toward the fire, eyes darting around wildly. The Imperial had run toward where the torch fell and was now hovering near the edges of darkness, sword drawn but trembling. The Redguard nearly backed into the crate with the idol on it. He turned, finally noticing the strange statue by his elbow. I saw him stare at it, momentarily forgetting the chaos around him. "What in Stendar's name?" he muttered, reaching out. The statue depicted a hooded female figure clutching an hourglass, carved of some black metal. The sand within the hourglass hung suspended, as if time itself were frozen. Even from where I crouched, I felt a queasy unease looking at it, as if the idol somehow looking back. And oh, it happened so fast that the Redguard's face slackened, his eyes glazing over as if he lifted the idol. A low chuckle bubbled from his throat, then threw into hysterical laughter. He held the idol up, giggling like it whispered the funniest joke in Tamriel into its ear. The sound raised every hair on my body. Now, I had to act now while he was distracted. Still crouched in shadow, I slipped a small throwing knife from my boot, weighing whether to risk a toss or to take him down silently. But before I could decide, the Redguard suddenly screamed, "Take it back! Take it back!" and with a wild swing of his arm, hurled the idol into the darkness beyond the camp. The fool threw it away. I bit back a curse and ducked lower on instinct. My eyes tracked the idol's silhouette as it spun end over end and vanished into the swamp with a distant splash. That changed things. My precious cargo was now laying somewhere out in the bog. At least it was away from these lunatics for the moment, but now I had to fetch it out of the mud while two crazed smugglers were still on the loose. So much for an easy snatch and go. At least, the Redguard was free of the artifact's grip now. In fact, the moment it left its hand, he staggered, as if waking up from a nightmare. He blinked in confusion, taking in the scene. The Nord, dead by the torch. Ingvar and the Bosmer collapsed in the reeds. He began to shake uncontrollably. The Imperial by the trees was still shouting for the others, only to turn and finally notice the Redguard's outburst. "Jareth, what are you doing?" he yelled, clearly having no idea what insanity had just possessed his friend. The Redguard, Jareth, I guess, looked at his empty hands and then toward the others. I saw the realization hit him that he might have been the one to throw the idol. Fear, guilt, and panic twisted his face. He gave one last panicked glance into the dark swamp where the idol had gone, and then turned and ran. Not deeper into the marsh, but back, past the bonfire, as if he intended to flee into the night and leave this cursed place behind. Oh, no, you don't. If he escaped, he might alert the authorities or return with reinforcements, neither of which I wanted. And I still had to get that idol without looking over my shoulder for a vengeful smuggler. He sprinted past my hiding spot, boots slipping in the mud. In a fluid motion, I rose and sprang at him from behind. One hand clamped hard over his mouth before he could scream. My dagger drove up under his ribs. He buckled in my grip, a muffled cry lost against my palm. I gritted my teeth and twisted the blade. In moments, the fight drained out of him, and he sagged to the ground. Killing up close. It never gets easier. But it was him or me. I eased the Redguard's lifeless body down and yanked my dagger free. The Imperial must have been too far or too distracted to hear the scuffle. I saw no sign of him rushing back yet. Either he was tending to Ingvar, or he was fleeing as well. Quickly, I wiped my blade on the Redguard's tunic and slid it away. My eyes went to the tree line where the idol had vanished. Somewhere out there in the mire lay a very dangerous bit of merchandise, still exerting its influence perhaps. But I needed to secure it, fast, before it claimed any more victims, or before it could work its magic on me. Steeling myself, I ventured toward the dark swamp beyond the camp's edge where the idol had flown. Past the ring of tents, the ground sloped downward into a murky fen. The fog was thicker here, and an unnatural silence had fallen. Not a cricket chirp, not a frog croak, as if every living creature with a lick of sense had already fled. I whispered a quick plea to Nocturnal under my breath. Luck for the shadows, as I retrieved a small lantern from my pack and struck it a light. The orange glow was feeble in the mist, but it was better than groping blind. "All right, cursed idol," I mumbled to myself. "Where did you land?" I moved slowly, lantern held aloft in one hand, an empty burlap sack ready in the other to wrap the artifact. Each footstep sank into the cold mud or shallow pools, the swamp eager to swallow anything that lingered. A few times I nearly lost my footing on submerged roots or stones. Once my boot plunged into a hidden sinkhole with a loud squelch, submerging my leg up to the knee in putrid water. Oh, I grimaced at the stench, like rot and sulfur all mixed in. I hauled myself out, shivering as I pressed on. I lifted the lantern high and resumed my search. The fog played tricks on my eyes, every gnarled root or twisted branch appearing as a looming figure until I drew close. Easier said than done to keep calm. Soon the shadows weren't just shadows. I spotted a shape a few yards to my right and swung the lantern toward it, heart lurching. It was a young woman, drenched and pale, her dark hair hanging limp over her face. She stood waist deep in a stagnant pool. I almost called out, what foolish girl would be out here? But something kept me quiet. She wasn't moving, not reacting to the light, and her eyes, when I squinted to see, glowed faintly. I took a cautious step closer, raising the lantern. My free hand went to the hilt of my dagger. "Hello?" I whispered. The woman slowly lifted her head. Through the curtain of tangled hair, I glimpsed a deathly grin, far too wide across her cheeks. But I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that, the figure had vanished, leaving only ripples in the black water where she once stood. I exhaled a shaky curse. This was Vermina's doing. Only the Prince of Nightmares could conjure such horrors. This idol was whirring into my mind, just as it had with the smugglers. I forced myself to focus on what was real, the steady glow of the lantern, the solid weight of the dagger in my hand, the sound of the mud beneath my boots. I wasn't going to let a damn illusion break me. and so I pushed forward. And at last, my lantern light glinted off something metallic amid a clump of mireweed. There, half sunk into a muddy pool, was the idol. I carefully parted the reeds to be sure. The small statue lay on its side in the muck, a robed woman cast in black metal, clutching an hourglass. The glass gleamed, and trapped sand within shimmered unnaturally, as if it was aware of my presence. A chill emanated from it that I could feel even though through the swamp's cold, an aura of pure malevolence. My instincts screamed at me not to touch it with bare skin. Using the burlap sap like gloves, I gingerly lifted the idol out of the mud. The instant I did, a wave of dizziness hit me. The mist swirled, and for a heartbeat the world itself seemed to tilt. I nearly toppled before catching myself on a tree root. A cacophony of whispers grazed my ears, but then they faded as quickly as they came. I steadied, shoving the idol quickly into the burlap. I cinched the sack tight, wrapping the cloth around the idol several times. At least it was out of sight. Some of the pressure behind my eyes eased the moment it was covered. Clutching the wrapped idol, I snatched up the chest lid I'd bought and turned back toward the camp. The bonfire was dying, just a faint orange glow in that deep fog, but it was enough to orient me. I needed to seal this thing in its chest and get out. As I neared the perimeter of the camp, I heard movement. I doused my lantern quickly and crouched, heart thudding. Had one of them survived and recovered their senses? Or worse, was somebody else here? I crept closer, keeping low. As I neared the dying firelight, I spotted movement by one of the tents. It was the Bosma woman. She was somehow still alive, crawling weakly through the mud. Blood covered her neck and chest from a vicious wound in her throat, and each breath came in a wet, choking gasp. I approached her cautiously, hidden blade drawn but lowered. For all she knew, I was just another nightmare coming out of the fog. Up close, she was in a bad way, pale as a ghost, eyes glassed over with shock, hands slick with her own blood as she tried in vain to staunch the wound. I knelt at her side and gently took her hand. She tried to speak, blood bubbling on her lips, and a faint word escaped. Help. I whispered back, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. Her eyes suddenly widened at some unseen horror, and she began to shake. A final fit of terror racked her body, and then she fell limp, life fading. I laid her hand across her chest and whispered a quiet farewell before I stood. I staggered to the large chest by the tent and stuffed the wrapped idol back into it. The lock was broken, so I wound some spare rope around the lid to hold it shut. It was a flimsy seal, but at least the idol was contained and out of sight. Then I hefted the chest under my arm, surprised at how heavy the damn thing felt. Maybe it was just my exhaustion. I seemed to carry the weight of all of those nightmares inside. The marsh didn't want to let me go quietly. On the slog back, I heard eerie whispers, and even a child's laughter echoing in the fog. In the corner of my eye, distorted shapes flitted among the twisted trees. Once, I even heard heavy footsteps sloshing behind me. I spun around with my lantern raised, but nothing was there. Only silence and swirling mist. I refused to stop or look again, clutching the chest and focusing on the path ahead. I pressed on until those nightmare sounds faded and the ground finally grew firm beneath my boots. After what felt like an eternity, the stony silhouettes of Riften's walls finally came into view through the dawn haze. I slipped back into the city via the docks, unseen by the groggy guards, and headed straight for the flagon's secret entrance beneath the old cistern. I stumbled into the flagon, dripping swamp water and deathly exhausted. A few guildmates gaped as I dropped the mud-caked chest onto the table and slumped into a chair. Delvin hurried over with a weary look and managed a tired smirk. "It's done," I rasped. "The idol's in the chest, and before you ask, yes, it's as cursed as they come." I gave him a brief rundown of what happened, how the smugglers fell to the idol's influence and tore at each other. His face tightened, but he nodded. Delvin, he wasn't one to be too easily surprised, but even his jaw dropped. "The client's coming for it today," Delvin muttered, eyeing the sealed chest. He slid a fat coin pouch my way. "You earned this, and then some." I accepted with a shaky hand. "Don't worry, we won't be opening it," he added. "Go and get some rest." I didn't need to be told twice to do that. Let the secretive client handle this curse thing from here on. I'd done my part. I left Delvin to lock the idol away and dragged myself off to wash up and collapse into bed. And so there it is. Now you know why I look like death warmed over today. The cursed cargo is off my hands, the pace in my pocket, and the nightmares, well, I suppose they might stick around for a while. Truth be told, gold feels a bit lighter after a job like that. I can't shake the image of those poor fools tearing each other apart, or those horrors I saw in the swamp. But in the line of a thief's work, you've learned to swallow your fear or choke on it. I've had my fill of Daedric artifacts. If I never see another, it'll be too soon. Anyway, keep the tale between us, all right? I don't need any of the other new members of the guild or the old ones thinking I've gone soft by going over these memories with you. Actually, I think you owe me the next round. Nocturnal knows that I've earned it. Not every night ends with a thief walking out of a nightmare, just alive enough to tell the tale, albeit in a very hushed voice.